Chapter 10:26. Neighbors on the left and right, Lord Yang, who unfortunately lived in the middle, could no longer sit still. He immediately brought Gu Zhuting with him to the mansion that was currently under construction. Yang Fan did not ride a horse, but rode an ox cart. He finally understood that even someone as valiant as the great assassin Gu was still a weakling on the bed who could not bear to be killed. Given her delicate and powerless appearance, how could he let her ride a horse? When he brought her out of the estate, Yang Fan had been worried that the three Gu brothers would notice something was off, but he had still braced himself and brought Gu Zhuting. Gu Zhuting was currently his personal guard, and although he had repeatedly emphasized that he had recovered from his injuries, his subordinates did not think so. If he did not bring Gu Zhuting with him on this journey, it would only arouse the suspicion of others. But it seemed that the three Gu brothers were quite careless. They had not even noticed the strange change in the girl's body. This allowed Yang Fan to inwardly sigh in relief, laughing at his own lack of confidence. The land around Yang Fan's new estate had already been delineated by the Ministry of Works, and a few low-ranking officials were currently conducting detailed measurements. By the time Yang Fan arrived, the 5 sons of the Prince of Xiang were already gone. The land they had set their eyes on had been forcefully taken away by Wu Chongxuan. No matter how good their mentality was, they still felt humiliated and found it embarrassing to remain here. However, to the left of Yang Fan's estate, Wu Chongxuan and his wife were still standing there. Wu Chongxuan had never dared to say too much about the affairs of the clan, leaving everything to Princess Anil. The area that Princess Anil had initially delineated was the size of 3 princely estates, far exceeding the standard of a princess's estate. Xiao Zhiqin was helpless, so he could only beat around the bush and give her a warning, mentioning the emperor to Princess Anil. Their estate had been granted by the emperor, and the cost of construction had to be reported to the emperor. If the estate was too large, it would definitely be discovered by the empress. Although Princess Anil did not understand why the empress was treating her coldly by the day, she knew that she was no longer favored by her grandmother, so she exercised some restraint and shrunk the size of the manor by half. When Yang Fan arrived, Princess Anil was gesticulating to Xiao Zhiqin about the issues that needed attention during the construction of the mansion. When she saw Yang Fan arrive, Princess Anil instructed the puppet-like Wu Chong, "You tell him. Remember, this garden must be the same as the one in Luoyang." One of the reasons Yang Fan had come was because of the Prince of Xiang's 5 sons. When the Prince of Xiang's 5th son had arrived in the capital, he had not gone to welcome him. Now that the Prince of Xiang had run over to be his neighbor, he found it difficult to avoid meeting him. The other reason was because of Li Guer. Li Guer had always been domineering, and in the Easter market he had once again refused to give Li Guer face, resulting in a feud between the two. He was worried that this princess would become arrogant and not only drive away the Prince of Xiang's 5th son, but also encroach on his estate. Fortunately, although Li Guer was domineering, she was primarily relying on the power of her husband's family. If she only relied on her father, who was the crown prince, she would not even have the confidence to face off against some of the more powerful ministers, much less Yang Fan. For this reason, although she was willful, she did not dare to forcefully seize a private residence. Yang Fan already knew that the place to the right of his estate was the place chosen by the Prince of Xiang's 5th son, but when he arrived he did not see Li Qingqi and his brothers. Yang Fan frowned, hesitating over whether he should go see Wu Chongxuan or pretend not to know that he was in that group of people, when he saw Li Guer walking toward him. Yang Fan patted Gu Zhuting's knee and got off the carriage alone. At this moment, Yang Fan had a relatively deep understanding of Li Guer. Not only was this woman licentious and shameless, she did not even have the basic cultivation and elegance of a member of the royal family. He was afraid that Li Guer would insult Gu Zhuting again, so he did not want them to come into contact. Wu Chongxuan saw that his beloved wife had abandoned him to go see Yang Fan alone and was very displeased. He regarded Liguer as unparalleled in the world and treated her like a treasure. He thought that all the men in the world, like him, treated Liguer like a living treasure. It seemed that if Liguer beckoned with her finger, he would crawl under her skirt like a dog. However, because in the eastern market of Chang'an, Yang Fan had publicly refused to give Liguer face, although Wu Chongsun was displeased, he did not think too much about it. Liguer walked closer and gradually slowed down her pace. She put her hands behind her back and walked gracefully like a cat, swaying along the way. Yang Fan saw this and had to admit that in terms of appearance, Anlu was indeed the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life. Liguer wore a charming smile that could turn all living things upside down and said, "General Yang, we will be neighbors from now on." Yang Fan's face darkened and said, "That's really unfortunate." Liguer's face changed, and she said angrily, "Did I ask you to avoid me like a snake or a scorpion? Why did you humiliate me again and again?" Yang Fan said, "People will humiliate themselves, and their descendants will humiliate them. Your Highness, why don't you reflect on why I have been disrespectful to the princess?" Liguer glanced coldly at Gu Zhuting in the carriage and sneered, "Just because of her? That bitch." Yang Fan said in a deep voice, "Don't forget, if it wasn't for her, you wouldn't be here today, and your father would be long dead. She is the savior of your family." Liguer raised her curvy chin and sneered disdainfully. "All the land under the sky belongs to the king, and all the people who live on the land are the king's subjects. My father has been designated as the emperor's heir, and you, as the courtiers, should sacrifice your own lives to save him. I am the emperor's daughter, and you saving me is also a sign of loyalty. Do you want me to owe her a favor?" Yang Fan looked at her deeply and said with a face full of hatred, "How did you become like this?" Liguer said sweetly, "How did I become like this? I don't find any difference from before. Oh, if there is anything, it is that I am more beautiful than before. Clothes make the man, and saddle make the horse. Even if you're born beautiful, you still need gorgeous clothes and jewelry to make you more beautiful." Yang Fan was not angry because of her words. He asked lightly, "Have you seen the moat outside Chang City?" Liguer did not know why he suddenly changed the topic. After a moment of surprise, she said, "Yes, why?" Yang Fan said, "Do you think the moat is beautiful?" Liguer frowned and said, "When I entered the city, I saw that the moat had dried up, and the bank was full of mud. It was dirty. What was there to see?" Yang Fan smiled and said, "It was autumn last year when I rushed over from Luoyang. It was a refreshing autumn day, and the river was clear and blue. When the wind blew, it sparkled. There were also white clouds reflected on the water surface. It was very beautiful. Unfortunately, in order to widen the river and clean up the mud, the Chang's local government has cut off the river. I did not expect that when the layer of clear water was uncovered, it was so dirty underneath." Liguer's pretty face slowly changed color, but Yang Fan was still saying, "When the silt is removed, the bottom is even more filthy. The stench makes it hard for people to breathe. Just like you, Your Highness, when you were in Fangzhou, even if you were pretending, at least you still had a bit of fake cuteness. But now, you have identity and status. You are more and more unscrupulous, and your true nature is undoubtedly exposed. I really don't understand why God gave a person such a beautiful appearance, but gave her such a dirty heart, vulgar, shallow, perverse, selfish, lascivious, shameless." Liguer said angrily, "Yang Fan, that's enough." Yang Fan sneered and continued, "I don't know what you will become when your father becomes the emperor, and you can be more unscrupulous. Some people say that you are the most beautiful princess since the founding of the Tang dynasty. But if you don't repent, one day you will also become the ugliest princess since the founding of the Tang dynasty. Stop!" Liguer scolded. Yang Fan stopped in his tracks, but he did not turn back. He only said coldly, "Dare I ask, what is the matter, Your Highness?" Liguer's sharp nails pierced the palm of her hand, and she controlled the anger in her heart. She gritted her teeth and said, "As long as I want, no man will be unwilling to crawl under my feet. Yang Fan, you are no exception. You will kneel under my feet like a dog, wagging your tail to me, begging me to forgive you, begging me." Yang Fan slowly turned around with a mocking sneer on his face. He said mockingly, "Like I said, if the clear water is removed, what is revealed is the filthy silt. Only by digging up the filthy silt can one smell the nauseating stench. Some things always need to be uncovered layer by layer. Just like your Highness, I should now add another virtue to you: arrogance." Yang Fan laughed and left. Ligueur looked at his back and gritted her teeth. Her pretty face had 2 fierce scars, and her eyes were burning as if they were going to spit out a flame and burn him to ashes. She had never been called such a cheap person before, even when she was doing something very cheap. But when she became a princess again, there was someone who called her so unbearably. Wu Chongxuan had been staring at her from afar, as if his beautiful wife was being taken advantage of. When Ligueur angrily walked towards him, he turned around and pretended to warn Xiao Yuanwei. Ligueur walked to his side with a calm face and said, "You still haven't finished?" Wu Chongxuan smiled and said, "Not yet, soon, soon." Ligueur vented all the anger she suffered from Yang Fan on him, and angrily said, "Really a useless piece of trash! I gave you such a simple task, and you can't even do it properly." Wu Chongxuan hurriedly said, "Wife, where are you going?" Ligueur turned around and angrily shouted, "I'm going back to the Fu." "What, you useless thing! Do you only know how to follow behind a woman? You better obediently stay here. Every blade of grass and tree of this courtyard has to be arranged like the manor in Luoyang. If anything goes wrong, I will hold you responsible." Wu Chongxuan did not dare to chase after her. When he saw Ligueur angrily board the carriage and leave, he unhappily turned around. Xiao Zhichen, the vice minister of the Ministry of Works, quickly put away the smile on his face and pretended to be respectful as he raised his brush and said, "Royal Prince, please continue." Wu Chongxuan vented all the anger he suffered from Ligueur on Xiao Yuanwei. His spittle flew as he said, "You piece of trash, you still can't understand such a simple matter. Quickly send a letter to the Ministry of Works in Luoyang and tell them to go to my residence and draw a map of the back garden. Bring it over and build the same. If there is any mistake, this prince will hold you responsible." Wu Chongxuan finished speaking and left in a huff. He did not dare to return to the Fu immediately, afraid that he would be scolded by Ligueur again. He could only walk around and relax. Ligueur sat in the carriage and was about to leave Longqing Lane when she suddenly poked her head out of the carriage. She stared at the small island in the middle of the lake, and a malicious smile slowly appeared in the corner of her eyes. She had changed her mind. She wanted Yang Fan to die. She must kill Yang Fan immediately. Chapter 10:27. Princess Annel angrily returned to the mansion and immediately sent someone to summon Du Wentian. Du Wentian was originally going to accompany them to see the foundation of the house, but Wu Chongxuan was very dissatisfied with him wandering around Princess Annel. Although he didn't dare to say anything in front of Princess Annel, he didn't give Du Wentian a good look either. Du Wentian had always coveted Princess Annel, and when he saw Wu Chongxuan's behavior, he felt guilty. Therefore, he found an excuse and left first, saying that he had to settle the matter that Princess Annel had instructed him to do. Although Du Wentian was looking for an excuse, he actually went to find out and had just returned to the mansion. When he heard that Princess Annel had summoned him, Du Wentian was shocked. When he found out that Wu Chongxuan didn't return with her, his lust took over and he hurriedly went to see Annel. Princess Annel returned to her residence and had just changed her clothes when she heard that Du Wentian had arrived. She waved her hand to dismiss the maids and ordered, "Call him in." Du Wentian lowered his head and respectfully walked into the room. He bowed deeply and said, "Du Wentian greets the princess." "Forget it," Princess Annel casually ordered. Du Wentian raised his head and saw Princess Anel standing in front of him. She was dressed in a bright red peony green muslin robe and a daffodil green leaf skirt that dragged on the ground. Her snow-white chest was exposed, and in the middle of her beautiful collarbones was a seductive cleavage. His eyes couldn't help but stare. Princess Anel straightened her chest, and her eyes were watery. She coquettishly said, "Du Wentian, you're really daring to stare at me like this." Du Wentian remembered how she teased him last time and knew that this princess wasn't a pure woman. He gathered his courage and said, "The princess is as beautiful as a fairy and is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life. Seeing the princess's unparalleled beauty, how can I only be daring?" Princess Anel glanced at his lower body and saw that there was a small tent on his robe. She couldn't help but cover her mouth and giggle. Her self-esteem was hurt when she was ridiculed by Yang Fan by the Longqing pool. Now that she saw how obsessed Du Wentian was, she regained some confidence. Princess Enlu turned around gracefully and tossed her round and perky buttocks at Du Wentian. She walked over gracefully and sat down on the Arhut couch. The water-green silk was tied into a knot around her slender waist. As she sat down, her slender waist seemed to bend, and the back of her waist stretched out in a smooth arc. Princess Enlu said in a tender voice, "How's the investigation of the matter that I ordered you to do?" Du Wentian composed himself and bowed. "Princess has instructed me to do my best. I've already found out that old Madame Zheng's birthday is September 21st. Most of the aristocratic families in Chang, and sent people to Luoyang to congratulate old Madame Zheng on her birthday last year, so they still remember it." Princess Anel muttered, 21st of September? There were still about 4 months to go. By that time, Shanghai Wana would have already given birth, and there would be no evidence to catch. There won't be enough time. What about Shanghai Waner's birthday? Du Wentian said, "Shanghai Waner is still unmarried. She has never held a banquet to celebrate her birthday, so it's not easy to find out the exact date of her birthday. However, I heard from an uncle that Shanghai Waner's grandfather and father were executed by the Empress on December 13th of the first year of Linda. At that time, Shanghai Waner wasn't even a month old, so Shanghai Waner's birthday should be in late November or early December." Princess Enlu raised her eyebrows again and said, "November or December, that's even more impossible. Is there any other reason to use?" Du Wentian shook his head and said, "I'm ashamed. I really can't find out. Your Highness, are you planning to?" Princess Anel said, "If her birthday is just around the corner, I can use the birthday celebration as an excuse to gather the Chang and officials and give her an unexpected surprise as an excuse to break into the island. At that time, she won't have any reason to refuse to see anyone. As long as she comes out, do you think the whole world won't know about this scandal?" Du Wentian said, "What if Shanghai Waner doesn't want to see anyone?" Princess Anel sneered and said, "How can there be such an unreasonable person in the world? How can there be such an unreasonable thing? If she still refuses to see anyone, I have plenty of ways to force my way in. For example, I can arrange for someone to cause some trouble and create the illusion of an assassination. As long as I have a reason to gather the Chang and officials and nobles on the island, I'm not afraid that she won't come out." Du Wentian praised, "Your Highness's wisdom is unparalleled. What a brilliant plan." Princess Anel smiled and said, "I didn't come up with this plan. Back at Dragon's Gate, Wei Wang and Liang Wang wanted to find my father with the excuse of an assassin. I'm just copying them. All right, stop flattering me. Now that we don't have an excuse, what do you think we should do?" Du Wentian looked at her round and curvy, and really wanted to flatter the princess. However, although the princess was flirting with him, she didn't show any signs of going further. Du Wentian still didn't dare to be too presumptuous. Hearing Princess Anel's words, Du Wentian couldn't help but frown and ponder seriously. Princess Anil also frowned and pondered for a long time. Suddenly, Princess Anil's eyes lit up and she said excitedly, "I got it." Du Wentian hurriedly asked, "Your Highness, what's your plan?" Princess Anil waved her hand and said, "Come closer." Du Wentian hurriedly stepped forward and gently bent down. As soon as he bent down, his nose smelled a delicate fragrance. What he saw was an alluring, deep ravine. Looking down from above, two strange peaks stood out. It was rare for Du Wentian to have such intimate contact with Li Guo, so he was extremely excited. But his excitement didn't last for too long. When Princess and Li's method was spoken of, it was like a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head, causing him to break out in cold sweat from fright, and his charming and alluring thoughts had been scared off to Java. Did this princess only know such a simple and direct method that was full of loopholes? Du Wentian said in shock, "Your Highness, if we do this, won't we cause too much of a commotion? If word gets out, it will be a great crime that will lead to the extermination of the entire clan. We can't do this. We can't do this." Princess Anil said in a carefree manner, "Why can't we do this? As long as our hands and feet are clean enough, who can find fault with us?" Du Wentian said with trepidation, "Your Highness, let's think about it carefully. There must be a way. There are too many loopholes in this plan. It really isn't feasible. As long as Shangguan Daiji calms down and thinks about it carefully, he will definitely understand the reason behind it and will be able to trace it back to us." Princess Anil said in disdain, "At that time, she will already be a prisoner awaiting execution. Will there still be a chance to investigate the truth? The emperor is far away in Luoyang. How will he know the details? Won't it be up to us to say whatever we say? At that time, the only thing His Majesty the Emperor will want to do is to kill Shangguan to cover up his shame. He won't investigate this matter." Du Wentian shook his head repeatedly, still not daring to agree. He may be blinded by lust, but how can he easily agree to something like losing his head? Princess Anil said angrily, "Didn't you say that you are willing to die for me?" Du Wentian knelt down and kowtowed, saying, "For your Highness, I will go through fire and water without hesitation. But this matter is too risky. If Princess is involved, I won't be able to redeem myself even if I'm cut into 1,000 pieces. I absolutely dare not agree." Princess Anil saw that he was unwilling to give in, and her eyes turned slightly. She sighed and said, "Fine, this is indeed difficult for you. Since that's the case, let me think of a perfect plan first." Du Wentian heaved a sigh of relief and repeatedly kowtowed in agreement. Princess Anil lay down lazily on the couch and said unhurriedly, "I'm tired. Give me a shoulder massage." Du Wentian was stunned and asked in disbelief, "Princess, are you talking about me?" Li Guo glared at him and scoffed, "Is there anyone else in this room?" "This one obeys." Du Wentian was wild with joy. He quickly walked over and placed his trembling hands lightly on Li Guo's shoulders. Li Guo was wearing a dress that bared her chest, revealing a large area of crystal clear and shockingly fair skin. With a light press from Du Wentian, a kind of soft and seductive feeling seeped into his heart and spleen. Du Wentian pressed a few more times, and his lustful heart began to stir. He could no longer restrain himself, and he couldn't help but move a little towards the protruding curves of her chest. Seeing that Princess Anil didn't respond, Du Wentian's courage gradually grew. He was about to move a little closer when Li Guo suddenly raised her hand and lightly placed it on his. Du Wentian's body stiffened. He saw that Li Guo didn't even open her eyes. She only pulled his hand and lightly moved it to her soft and plump breasts. Du Wentian couldn't help but shiver and said with a trembling voice, "Princess!" Princess Anil said in a sweet voice, "It's a little sore here too. Help me rub it and here." Princess Anil pulled his hand and moved it towards her flat stomach. "Down, down, and down," she said in a gentle voice. "Here and here." Du Wentian couldn't hold it in anymore. Just as his big hand touched her round and slender waist that was full of vitality and exuded boundless desire, a beastly roar came from his throat, and he pressed down on her. Princess Enel was half naked as she laid there. Her milky white breasts were half covered and half exposed. They were as alluring as a blossoming flower, like a swan that had been shot by an arrow. She raised her beautiful neck and pressed her hands tightly against Du Wentian's head. She panted delicately and said, "Young Master Du, do you want me?" Du Wentian was about to go crazy from anxiety. He really wanted to dive into the grotto of ecstasy right now. But Princess Enli's legs were tightly wrapped around his neck, and her hands were pressing down on his head, so he could only satisfy his lust. Hearing Princess Enel say this, Du Wentian couldn't wait and said, "Yes, yes. Princess, please take pity on me." Princess Enel's nose was filled with lust. She said with a sweet blush, "Then are you willing to do what I want you to do?" Du Wentian only wanted to burrow into her body. There was nothing he wouldn't agree to. He immediately nodded and said, "I'm willing. I'm willing. As long as the princess takes pity on me, I'm willing to do anything for the princess." Princess Enlil laughed unrestrainedly and spread open her thighs. Du Wentian was like a wild beast that had been released from its cage. With a roar, he jumped up. His robe had long been opened, and as he stood upright, his buttocks began to shake like a male dog in heat. It was a pity that he had endured for a long time. In front of him was the beauty he had been infatuated with for a long time. In the end, the moment he burrowed into Princess Enel's body, he lost control. Du Wentian was very unwilling, but he could no longer control himself. He could only lie on her body like a deflated ball. Princess Enli's eyes were like silk and her jade dimples were blushing. She gently caressed his shoulder and back. Her face was flushed and she looked like she was in love. However, there was a clear and proud smile in her eyes. Du Wentian lacked courage, so she gave him some courage. Now that he had tasted the sweetness, would she be afraid that he wouldn't obediently do things for her? After Yang Fan left the Longqing pond, he didn't immediately return to the island. Instead, he drove to the 1,000 cavalry camp outside the Xuanwu Gate. Although he still had the excuse that his injuries hadn't fully recovered, his real purpose was to accompany Wan on the island. The 1,000 cavalry camp was where his roots were. He couldn't stay away for long. However, when Yang Fan arrived at the 1,000 cavalry camp, he just walked around and met with the generals, brigade commanders, and even squad leaders. The emperor hadn't moved the capital to Chang'an yet. The 1,000 cavalry camp didn't have much to do other than daily training. However, it was necessary for him to come. If he didn't appear for a long time, his influence in the army would be reduced. Yang Fan's action was to show everyone that he was the supreme commander of the 1,000 cavalry camp. Yang Fan stayed at the 1,000 cavalry camp for more than 2 hours. When he drove back to Chang, and he saw that the streets were crowded, there was a burst of enthusiastic cheers from the brothel. Yang Fan casually glanced around and unexpectedly saw a few familiar faces on the stage. In the brothel, an illusion was being performed on the stage that was half the height of a person. The performer was the old leader, Mo Guan. Old Mo was a famous master of illusion. Back then, Yang Fan had invited him from Chang into Luoyang. He had wanted him to expose the deceit of Taoist Shifang, the old nun of Hanoi, and the barbarian Moliai. Unexpectedly, Xue Huai had burned down Mingtang and heaven. Wu Zetian thus vented her anger on the old nun of Hanoi, who claimed to know the past and the future. Thus, this master of illusion was useless. Later, Yang Fan was ordered to go to Fangzhou to bring the prince of Luling back to the capital. He had even used old Mo's illusion group as a cover. Later, the two sides parted in Fangzhou. Unexpectedly, they had come to Chang, and again, old Mo did not notice Yang Fan. He was performing a square egg on the stage. A round egg was hidden in a hat. In the blink of an eye, the bottom of the hat was filled with eggs. Moreover, each egg was square, causing the audience to click their tongues in wonder. This was just a simple illusion. Because he knew that Yang Fan was a minister of the imperial court and would not use illusions to steal his business. Mo Guan had told Yang Fan the method of conjuring eggs and the secret of changing the shape of the eggshell by soaking it in vinegar. Yang Fan had once used this magic to tease his son. The little fellow was so stunned that he practically regarded his father as a deity. Now that he saw Mo Guan perform this illusion technique, Yang Fan couldn't help but think of his long-lost son in the distant Luoyang. He thought of his children being happy at his knees, and a sense of longing suddenly surged into his heart. However, it would still be several months before he could see them again. At this thought, Yang Fan couldn't help but faintly sigh. At this moment, someone was coming from the island in the center of the lake. When he saw Yang Fan's carriage parked on the side of the road, he hurried over and softly reported, "Ah Lang, the 5 princes of the Prince of Xiang's estate have just come to pay a visit to the island in the center of the lake. Because Ah Lang is not on the island, they have already left." The princes were of noble status, so a visit from 5 princes was naturally no small matter. Thus, the person left behind on the island did not dare to tarry and immediately sent a message. Seeing that it was still early, Gu Zhuting asked Yang Fan, "Does Ah Lang want to pay a return visit to the estates of the 5 princes?" The moment Yang Fan heard the news, a thoughtful smile appeared on his face. He smiled and shook his head. Lightly patting Gu Zhuting's well-built and soft thigh, he said, Although your Ah Lang isn't Zhuge he still has to pay a visit to the thatched cottage 3 times. Haha, let's return to Longqing Square." Chapter 10:28. When Yang Fan had said to Gu Zhuting that he would wait for the Prince of Xiang's 5 sons to visit the thatched hut 3 times, he had only been joking. If he had really imitated Zhuge Liang and had the Prince of Xiang's 5 sons visit several times, it would have been too obvious. The joint visit of the Prince of Xiang's 5 sons had already expressed their attitude. Yang Fan thus understood their intentions, and he also understood that they were aware of his true intentions in competing with Princess and Lu in the eastern city of Chang'an. That was enough. There were some things that he could not speak too bluntly, nor could he do too bluntly, so he needed a response. Only in this way would he know if they had understood and the 2 sides could work together tacitly. Now that the Prince of Xiang's 5 sons had responded, he naturally understood what he had to do. On the morning of the next day, Yang Fan ordered someone to bring his visiting card to the Prince of Shochuan. When interacting with nobles, unless they were close friends who did not regard each other as outsiders, they would need to send a visiting card in advance to set up a meeting time. The Prince of Xiang's 5 sons had come without notice yesterday because Yang Fan had been recuperating on the island in the center of the lake. The Prince of Xiang's 5 sons had not expected him to leave the island. Now that Yang Fan wanted to visit the Prince of Xiang's 5 sons, he needed to make an appointment in advance. The appointment between Yang Fan and the Prince of Xiang's 5 sons was on the morning of the next day. On the next day, Yang Fan punctually paid a visit. As a loyal general, Yang Fan's rank was not just 1 or 2 ranks lower than that of the Prince of Xiang. According to etiquette, the Prince of Xiang did not need to come out to welcome him. All he needed to do was send a steward to lead him into the drawing room. But the moment Yang Fan stepped through the door, he saw 5 youths standing by the door, smiling at him. Yang Fan could not help but be somewhat surprised. He truly had not expected the Prince of Xiang's 5 sons to treat him with such courtesy. Yang Fan hurriedly quickened his steps and went forward. Before he reached the steps, he clasped his hands and bowed. Yang Fan pays his respects to the 5 princes. I am greatly honored to have troubled the princes to lower their ranks to welcome me. Today, Yang Fan was dressed in casual clothes. He wore a soft-legged hat and a pair of black boots with white soles. He wore a white inner robe with a tight leather belt and a light blue open robe with a light gold embroidered border. Because his robe was not tied with a leather belt, his movements made the wide robe and his large sleeves flutter in the wind. Because his robe was not tied with a leather belt, his movements caused his wide robe and his large sleeves to flutter. Li Qingqi laughed heartily and hurriedly came forward to support Yang Fan. He said, "General Yang is wearing a light robe today. You look very elegant. If I didn't know your identity, I would have thought that you were a scholar from the Imperial Academy. Just by looking at General Yang's graceful bearing, who would have thought that General Yang was actually a brave, skilled, and outstanding general?" Li Qingqi was very good with words. The Imperial College was divided into 3 levels: Imperial College, Imperial College, and Imperial College. The highest level was the Imperial College. Even the Xiozai were not the Xiozai of later generations. The Xiozai of the Tang dynasty were all talented scholars who were picked out of 10,000. They were even harder to pass than the Jinshe examination. Yang Fan smiled and said, "Your Highness, you flatter me. I am only a martial artist. This way of dressing is just a facade. Haha." Li Qingqi's smile faded slightly. He asked with deep concern, "When I was in Chang'an, I heard that General Yang was plotted against by thieves and thieves. I was very concerned. Yesterday, I came with several brothers to pay a visit. Unfortunately, General Yang was busy with military affairs and went to the cavalry camp. How is it? Has General Yang recovered?" Yang Fan smiled and replied, "Thank you for your concern, Your Highness. I have been recuperating from my injuries for a few months, and I have recovered. I will be able to return to the camp in another month or so." "That's good, that's good." Li Qingqi held his arm and smiled as he introduced, "General Yang has met these brothers of mine before, so I will not introduce them one by one. I heard that General Yang is coming today. These brothers of mine are waiting at the residence. Look, my 5th brother is usually very playful and did not go out today." As Li Qingqi spoke, Yang Fan cupped his hands in greeting to Li Qingyi and the others. The 4 of them smiled and returned the greeting. Li Qingqi said enthusiastically, "Come, come, come. A banquet has been prepared in the hall, and we are waiting for General Yang's arrival. Come, let us sit in the hall and drink while we talk." Li Qingqi held Yang Fan's arm and walked in front. Someone led Ren Wei and the others to rest. Gu Zhuting was dressed in green, and her hair was tied up with a cloth. She looked like a servant and followed closely behind Yang Fan. When Li Qingqi and the others saw her willowy eyebrows, almond-shaped eyes, and jade-like skin, they knew that she was a woman in disguise, so they did not ask any questions. The residence that Lu Chechen had prepared for the Prince of Xiang's 5 sons was rather large. It had 3 entrances for rooms, 2 halls, and a garden. It had a main gate, a ceremonial gate, and a middle gate. The windows in the hall were decorated with flower lattices, and the windows and doors were decorated with lifelike images of monkeys, deer, fish, birds, and other animals. The hall was spacious and bright, hung with vertical paintings of pines, bamboos, plum blossoms, and orchids. The elegant and tranquil atmosphere made it seem like a large study. The moment they entered the reception hall, maids began to serve all sorts of delicacies like fluttering butterflies, but there were no musicians or dancers in the 2 rooms to liven things up. In this way, the Prince of Xiang's 5 sons' regard and respect for Yang Fan could be seen, but it also did not give the impression that they were fawning on him and lowering their status. When Yang Fan saw this, he knew that the 5 brothers had put a lot of thought into this and couldn't help but silently praise them. Speaking of which, ever since Li Jiancheng and Li Shimin, the Li clan had produced many heroes. Alas, the demoness Wu Zetian had appeared out of nowhere. Now, any of the more astute and capable descendants of the Li clan had been killed by Wu Zetian, and even Wu Zetian's 2 most elegant sons had died a violent death. The current crown prince Li Xian and the Prince of Xiang Li Dan could be said to be extremely mediocre. Unexpectedly, their juniors were so outstanding. In the side courtyard of Li Guerre's estate, Du Wentian said to his family members with a gloomy expression, "Did you all hear what I said just now?" The family members nodded and replied, "Young master, be at ease. We understand." Du Wentian waved his hand and said, "Go." Spread the news as quickly as possible through the streets and alleys. Be careful and don't expose your family's identity. The family members immediately left. Du Wentian followed Liguer's orders. The first step was to create a rumor and spread the news that Shanghai Wanner was having an affair with someone and that she was pregnant. Liguer ordered Du Wentian to cut the evidence and give it to Yang Fan, having him spread the news that Shanghai Wanner was pregnant with Yang Fan's child. Even without Yang Fan, when Princess Anna learned that Shanghai Wanner was pregnant and had been sent to Chang'an to await childbirth, she also wanted to find a chance to cause trouble and kill Shanghai Wanner. She had no grudge against Shanghai Wanner. The only reason she had this idea was because of jealousy. She was jealous that her imperial grandmother treated her unfairly. She was pregnant out of wedlock, and her imperial grandmother treated her with disdain. Why was it that an outsider who was pregnant out of wedlock would shield her like this and treat her so harshly? She didn't understand. It was precisely because of the difference between the inside and the outside that Wu Zetian was so demanding of her. As an elder, even if he was unbearable, he still hoped that his child would have a noble character. Liguer, however, thought that this was her imperial grandmother's favoritism towards Shanghai Wanner. She wanted to use her own method to seek justice. As an imperial daughter, her status was incomparably noble, but she was ridiculed because she was pregnant out of wedlock. Then Shanghai Wanner should die because of this. This was only fair. As for involving Yang Fan, it was just a flash of inspiration. Liguer already hated Yang Fan to the core. She wanted to use this opportunity to eradicate Yang Fan in one fell swoop. However, even if her father sat on the throne, a minister of the imperial court was not someone that a princess like her could touch as she pleased. She must have a sufficient reason. Now, she could use this opportunity to drag Yang Fan into it. She didn't expect that the accusation she made up for Yang Fan was actually infinitely close to the truth. Unfortunately, she couldn't tell Du Wentian her real purpose. She only said that she needed a man to make this rumor more perfect. Yang Fan had many opportunities to get in touch with Shanghai Wanner when he was in Luoyang. Now that he was living on the island in the middle of the lake, he was the best candidate. However, she didn't expect that Du Wentian also had a motive for telling her the secret. The person Du Wentian hated to the core was Zhang Changzong. He was beaten up by Zhang Changzong in Xingjiao Temple. He wanted revenge. He thought that Princess Anil only involved Yang Fan because Yang Fan had humiliated her in Chang'an City. This small matter was obviously not as serious as the pain he had suffered. Therefore, he made a small change to Li Guer's instructions. He changed Yang Fan to Zhang Changzong. Yang Fan took his leave from the fifth prince's residence. He walked leisurely with a thoughtful expression on his face. Gu Zhuting walked beside him. Her sharp eyes scanned the crowd out of habit. After making sure that no dangerous people were approaching, she said to Yang Fan, "What are you thinking about, Alang?" Yang Fan smiled and said, "I'm thinking about the 5 sons of the Prince of Xiang. These 5 young people are not simple. They just arrived in Chang'an 2 days ago. This is only the 3rd day, but they have already found something that can buy people's hearts. Very impressive." Gu Zhuting was surprised and said, "Alang, are you talking about the 5 sons of the Prince of Xiang asking the emperor to plow the sorrowful fields and build a clinic?" Yang Fan nodded and said, "That's right." During the banquet, Gu Zhuting had heard Li Longji mention that there was a Zen master Hongfang of the Longhua Temple who built a clinic and took in hundreds of poor and sick people. In the end, because the emperor was about to move the capital in order to clean up the city, the Chang'an prefectural magistrate Lu Qiaotian actually wanted to drive these people away from Chang'an so that they would not be an eyesore. When Li Qingqi and his brothers learned about this, they were moved and planned to write a petition to the imperial court, asking the emperor to commend the Zen master Hongfang of the Longhua Temple for his kind and righteous deeds. The imperial court would also allocate funds to support the clinic. The 5 of them were willing to donate 50 mu of land, each to be used as the sorrowful fields of the Longhua Temple to help the poor and sick people. Li Qingqi also warmly invited Yang Fan to join him in this righteous cause, and was willing to take the lead in writing a petition with Yang Fan. Yang Fan generously agreed to write a petition together with them. He also donated 50 mu of land. At that time, Gu Zhuting felt that it was very rare for these princes to be so considerate of the people. Now that Lang mentioned it, could it be that they had other motives? Yang Fan smiled and replied, "Nothing else. They are just trying to buy people's hearts." Gu Zhuting resentfully said, "So that's how it is. Your servant thought they were good people." Yang Fan laughed and said, "How are they not good people? If everyone in the world is willing to buy people's hearts like this, how many good people would there be? Good people, some do it out of pity, some do it for peace of mind, some do it to accumulate virtue, and some do it for fame. What their motive is not important. What is important is that they have done a good deed." Gu Zhuting said, "Your servant is not saying that it is not good for them to do good deeds. But once the imperial court approves this matter, even though Lang is the one taking the lead, there are 5 Junwang who are asking for help at the same time. The common people will only remember those officials' favors, and who will remember Lang? Lang has done a good deed, but the good reputation has been earned by them. How can your servant be happy?" Yang Fan laughed and said, Actually, they are not trying to take advantage of me. The reason why they invited me to join them in this righteous cause is because they are in a difficult situation and really have no other choice. Moreover, they are also testing me to see if I really have the intention to help the Li family." Gu Zhuting blinked her eyes, not quite understanding what Yang Fan meant. Yang Fan explained further, although the Li family has somewhat recovered its strength, it is still far from being able to compete with the Wu family. Moreover, the current crown prince has been under house arrest in Fangzhou for many years and has not had any major conflicts with the Wu family. But now, the Prince of Xiang has been repeatedly attacked by the Wu family, and the two sides have long since formed an irreconcilable grudge. Under these circumstances, the Prince of Xiang's branch cannot steal the spotlight and steal the crown prince's limelight, nor can they directly confront the Wu family. Now that the emperor is about to move the capital, Zhang and the Wu family have come to Chang'an to buy people's hearts and rope in the nobles and officials. If the Prince of Xiang's branch wants to do something, they must avoid conflict with them, so they can only find another way. Zhang and the Wu family are both trying to rope in people from above, so they can only look down. Gu Zhuting said, "But why did they pull Lang along?" Yang Fan said, "Because I am not on good terms with the Wu family, and because I once saved the crown prince. Because of these 2 reasons, they pulled me along. Although the common people cannot see the storm in the court, the people in the court know it very well. With me, they will not be under too much pressure. You must know that the current crown prince was once emperor, and so was the Prince of Xiang. Both of them have the right to continue to rule the Tang dynasty. So they want to accumulate popularity, but they can't make the emperor, the Wu clan, the second Zhang clan, and the crown prince, who is in the same boat as them, fear them. It's very difficult." Gu Zhuting felt a headache after listening to Lang's explanation. What Lang said was more complicated and troublesome than sneaking into an army of millions to assassinate a general. Gu Zhuting shook her head and said, "I don't want to listen anymore. It's too complicated. I don't understand it at all." Yang Fan couldn't help but laugh when he heard what she said. At this time, they passed by a brothel in front of them and heard cheers. Yang Fan turned around and saw Mo Guan and his circus troupe performing illusions. Yang Fan smiled and said, "We are really fated to meet them. We did not support them yesterday and have nothing to do today. Let's go and see if they have any new illusions." Yang Fan said as he dismounted. Gu Zhuting also dismounted and stood in front of him to protect him. Among the crowd watching the illusions, a member of the Du family was talking about the gossip of the most talented woman in the court, Wanner. He did not notice that Yang Fan was walking towards him. Chapter 10:29. The servant of the Du residence did not expect that he would meet the key person in the brothel. The illusion was being performed on the stage, so he was not in the mood to watch. He spared no effort to spread the rumor. You still don't believe me? No matter how high Shanghai Wan-Er status is, or how talented she is still a woman. Does she not want a man? Zhang Changzong is a descendant of the prime minister, a descendant of an aristocratic family. He is a talented young man who knows everything about music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. He is also very beautiful. Otherwise, how could he have the reputation of Lianhua Lulang? Zhang Changzong and Shanghai Wan-Er both live in the palace. They see each other day and night. Isn't it natural for them to fall in love with each other? The person next to him obviously did not believe his words. He laughed and said, "That's not possible, right? Don't talk nonsense. Isn't Zhang Changzong the emperor's man? How could he dare to do such a thing behind the emperor's back?" The servant of the Du residence laughed and said, "Who doesn't do such things behind the emperor's back? Who isn't afraid of being found out? But the lightning from the sky has stirred up the fire from the earth. Is it that easy to endure? Let me tell you another thing. A few days ago, Zhang Changzong secretly brought Shanghai Wan-Er to Xingjiao Temple to pray. They were seen by someone. That Shangguan Wan-Er was already pregnant and had a big belly. They donated a large amount of money to the temple. The merit book clearly states, husband and wife. However, they both used aliases. Hey, not only do they have an affair, but they also have a bastard child. Going to the temple to pray to the Buddha is to pray for their safety. The person next to him said doubtfully, "There is such a thing?" Yang Fan's eyebrows slightly wrinkled. Gu Zhuting knew whose child Shanghai Wan-Er is pregnant with. When she heard that person speak nonsense and tarnish Wan-Er's reputation, she couldn't help but be furious. But just as she took a step forward, her wrist was tightly grabbed by Yang Fan. He shook his head at her. The servant of the Du residence proudly said, "Of course. Think about it. Zhang Changzong is the emperor's favorite boy, right? Shangguan Wan-Er is the emperor's most trusted aide, right? The emperor hasn't even moved back to Chang. Why did he send his most beloved man and most trusted confidant to Chang?" And as the servant of the Du residence said this, he sneakily looked around. Yang Fan had already turned his attention to the stage, as if he had not heard the servant's words. In fact, this Du residence servant was deliberately putting on an act. He wasn't really afraid that others would hear him. He was simply afraid that others wouldn't hear him. The servant pretended to be polite for a while before saying, "In this matter, it's clear that they deceived the emperor. Shangguan Wan-Er is pregnant with Zhang Changzong's bastard child, and her belly is getting bigger. She is afraid of being discovered by the emperor, so she found an excuse to hide in Chang, and Zhang Changzong is her adulterer, so how can she be at ease? Of course, she has to follow him." "No way. I heard that Zhang Changzong arrived in Chang'an first." "What's so strange about that? Is there anyone in this world more intimate than the person who sleeps with the same pillow? The emperor must have promised Zhang Changzong first. When Zhang Changzong arrived in Chang, and as long as he said that he couldn't handle it alone, the emperor would definitely send her most capable helper." Yang Fan walked out of the crowd with a calm face. Gu Zhuting caught up with him and asked in a low voice, "Alang?" Her voice was faintly murderous. The servant's slander had aroused her murderous intent. She didn't care whether that person should be punished for his words or not. She was a member of the Yang family. No matter who it was, as long as they harmed the Yang family's reputation and interests, they would be her enemy. And her best solution was to turn the other party into a dead person. Yang Fan understood what she meant. He shook his head gently and said, "This person isn't important. What's important is that these rumors are just random gossip spread by someone who has found some clues, or that someone has ulterior motives." Gu Zhuting said, "Alang, don't worry. I will find out." Yang Fan said, If there really is someone with ulterior motives, as long as you touch him, even if you find out the truth, it will alert the enemy. Don't touch him for now, just keep an eye on him. I want to know if there is someone behind him. If there is, who is this person and what is his purpose? Gu Zhuting nodded and quietly returned to the crowd. When Yang Fan returned to the carriage, his heart suddenly became heavy. He didn't know how they were discovered, just by going to Xing Jiaoxing. Could it be that someone had been monitoring their movements? The rumors spread by this person were both true and false. Was it because he heard it from others? Or was it because someone instructed him to do so? If this person wasn't the one who spread the rumors, then it would be extremely difficult for Ting to find out who the real one was. If this was just a rumor, Yang Fan wouldn't care at all. He had already experienced the ability of ordinary people to make groundless accusations. However, it was true that Wan was pregnant. Wan fought with her life in front of the Empress to fight for a chance to live for her and the child. The condition for the Empress to let Wan and the child go was that the news couldn't be leaked and it couldn't become a scandal. If this was the plan of someone with ulterior motives, then he would definitely take further action. The emperor did not care about the rumors and slander of the common people, and he would not have the opportunity to hear the rumors and slander of the common people. However, once this matter was proven to be the truth by the nobility, the only choice the empress had was to use the blood of Wanner and the child to wash away the humiliation the court had suffered. This matter was related to his woman and his child, so he didn't dare to be careless. This time, Yang Fan was very lucky. Du Wentian had just sent someone to spread the news when he heard it with his own ears. Gu Zhuting secretly watched the servant of the Du residence. With her skills and alertness, the servant of the Du residence naturally couldn't discover her. He spread the news in the brothel for a while and then turned to another tavern. This servant of the Du residence was very diligent in the matters that the young master had asked him to do. Wherever he went, he would go to places where there were many people, find an excuse to strike up a conversation, and then lead the topic to the scandal between Zhang Changzong and Shengguan Wanner. Gu Zhuting followed him to 2 places and confirmed that this person wasn't just casually telling others about it. He was intentionally spreading the news. In other words, he was the one directly spreading the rumors. This made it much easier to investigate. Gu Zhuting quietly watched him until he returned to the Du residence. After confirming his identity, she hurriedly returned to the island in the center of the lake. The Du clan of Fanchuan. When Yang Fan heard Gu Zhuting reveal the other's identity, he couldn't help but feel surprised. The Du clan of Fanchuan had no enmity with him. Moreover, his succession hall was closely cooperating with the Guanlong family, and the Du clan of Fanchuan was one of his important partners. What was the Du clan's intention? Although the rumors didn't involve him, the head of the Du clan, Du Jingting, was well aware of the relationship between him and Shengguan Wan. It was also because of this relationship that he had won the trust and support of the aristocratic families in Guanlong. What was the Du clan's intention in doing this? Yang Fan's mind raced, but he still couldn't figure it out. At this moment, Gu Zhuting bitterly said, "It must be Princess Annel's doing. She was humiliated by Lang in Chong and East Market, so she bears a grudge and wants to ruin." At this point, Gu Zhuting suddenly paused, feeling that her speculation wasn't correct. She muttered to herself, "No, if it's because Princess Annel bears a grudge against Lang, she should have said that the adulterer was Lang. Why did she link it to Zhang Changzong?" Hearing this, Yang Fan found it a bit strange and asked, "The one who spread the rumors is the Du clan of Fanchuan. What does it have to do with Princess Annel?" Gu Zhuting curiously asked, "Does Lang not know that the residence that Princess Annel and Royal Prince Gaoyan are living in is lent to them by the Du clan?" When Yang Fan heard this, he was also stunned. "You're saying that Princess and Lu and her husband are living in the Du residence in that courtyard?" Yang Fan didn't care about Wu Chongxuan and his wife at all and had never thought of paying them a visit. Thus, he didn't even know where they lived. Gu Zhuting nodded in agreement. Yang Fan thought carefully and felt that this matter was more and more shrouded in mystery and unfathomable. If Wu Chongxuan and his wife were also involved, then what did this mean? He wasn't in the rumor, so it was obvious that he wasn't involved. Wan lived in the inner court for a long time and kept a distance from all the other powers. She didn't have any major interests, so there wouldn't be anyone who couldn't wait to get rid of her. Could it be that the other party's real target was Zhang Changzong? The more Yang Fan thought about it, the more he felt that this guess was the most reasonable. The Wu and Li families had long been afraid of the rise of the second Zhang. Because of Zhang Changzong's slander, the emperor executed the Wu couple and Li Zhongruan. The conflict between the two families had completely intensified. Could it be that someone had discovered that Wan was pregnant and wanted to use this as a pretext to get rid of the second Zhang? Yang Fan's cleverness had led to his own downfall. He had overcomplicated a very simple grudge. However, he didn't know that the Du family didn't know anything about this at all. This matter was completely caused by the personal grudge of the Du family's young master, Du Wentian, and Princess Annel's jealousy. Du Wentian didn't know of his true identity, and the Wu family didn't participate. This matter was actually a trick that a lecher and a narrow-minded woman had worked together to create. However, because the person the lecher hated was Zhang Changzong, who had given the order to beat him, he carried out Princess Annel's orders with his own goods and made the matter even more complicated. The situation was too complicated, and there were too many coincidences. Therefore, even with Yang Fan's alertness, he couldn't guess the true reason. Yang Fan suddenly remembered that Princess Annel had taken the liberty to visit Shanghai and aroused his wariness. He had sent people to monitor Princess Annel's every move. Now that he knew that Princess Annel was living in the Du residence, perhaps those spies would have some information. Yang Fan immediately sent Ren Wei over the people responsible for monitoring Princess Annel to ask them personally. After receiving Yang Fan's orders, Ren Wei selected a total of 4 people from the Hall of Succession to be responsible for monitoring Princess Annel. These 4 people disguised themselves as peddlers and kept an eye on Princess Annel's residence every day. Every time Princess Annel left the residence, who she met and what she did, they all recorded it. Very quickly, Ren Wei found the 4 people in charge of the spies and brought them to Yang Fan. Yang Fan flipped through their records. He didn't expect that even the scene where Princess Annel met him by the Longqing Pond was recorded. On the 27th of the 5th month, for 10:15, she met with the loyal General Yang Fan by the Longqing Pond. They talked for less than half an hour before both left in a huff, each expressing their displeasure. Although Yang Fan had a lot on his mind, he couldn't help but laugh when he saw their official records. He carefully flipped through it again and didn't find anything special to pay attention to. He put down the book and said to the person, "Your records are quite detailed. Why did Annel stay in the Du residence? Didn't Lu Qiantian arrange a place for them to stay?" This seemed strange to Yang Fan. Lu Qiantian was on the Empress's side and should be very close to the Wu family. However, he actually didn't arrange a place for Wu Chongxuan and his wife. This didn't make any sense. Yang Fan's question wasn't within the scope of the spies' mission. However, they had done some research and immediately answered. Princess Annel wasn't satisfied with the accommodations arranged by the Lu residents. Therefore, she accepted the invitation of the Du family's young master, Du Wentian, to stay in the Du residence. Yang Fan said, "Does the Wu family and the Du family have any relationship?" He didn't mention Princess Annel because Li Gui'er had lived in Fangzhou since she was young and hadn't returned to the capital for long. It was impossible for her to have any relationship with the Du family. Up until now, he still suspected that the Du family and the Wu family had some secret relationship. The spy said, "I don't know if the Wu family and the Du family have any relationship." However, when Wu Chongxuan and his wife arrived at the capital, they encountered a frightened horse at the 10 Miles Pavilion. It was the young master of the Du family, Du Wentian, who killed the frightened horse and saved the couple. He even got injured because of this. That's how they became friends. The original head of the succession hall, young Master Jiang, had always been aloof and cold. He hated his subordinates, talking too much. Therefore, when the people of the succession hall saw him, they would often tremble with fear. They would only answer one question and answer two questions without daring to say anything more. However, Yang Fan was very friendly. The spy's nervousness gradually disappeared. He suddenly thought of an interesting story and couldn't help but blurt out, "However, I heard from the servants of the Du residence that the young master of the Du family was actually injured the day before he welcomed Wu Chongxuan and his wife. That day he was harassing a woman at Xingjiao Temple and was beaten up. He wanted to cover up the injury on his face. That's why he created the frightened horse incident." Yang Fan was taken aback, and his eyes gradually lit up. Chapter 1030. When Yang Fan heard that Du Wentian was the lecher who was beaten up by Zhang Changzong at Xingjiao Temple, he immediately figured out some of the problems that he had been hesitating about. Gu Zhuting also came to a realization and said excitedly, "I understand now." Du Wentian teased Xiao Miao and was taught a lesson by Zhang Fengchen. He bore a grudge, and after knowing Zhang Fengchen's identity, he guessed Sister Wan Er's identity, so he wants to take revenge on Zhang Fengchen. Yang Fan nodded and said, "Yes, that should be the case. I thought this was a conspiracy between the Wu and Du families against Second Zhang. I didn't expect it to be a personal grudge between Du Wentian and Zhang Changzong." Gu Zhuting relaxed her brows and said, "Since the reason is so simple, then it's easy to handle. Can you leave this matter to me?" Yang Fan glanced at her and said, "What do you plan to do?" Gu Zhuting said, "This matter was caused by Du Wentian. As long as we can make this trouble shut up, the storm will naturally subside." Yang Fan couldn't help but laugh and said, "I knew it. Your idea is to kill. Du Wentian's identity is not simple. Who knows how many subordinates he has told about this matter? If he suddenly dies, do you think the Du family will let it go easily? Will the Du family not investigate the cause? Moreover," Yang Fan's gaze deepened, "I have never understood why Princess Enlil, who has never interacted with Wan suddenly came to visit. In terms of friendship, the two of them are not even close. If she wanted to curry favor, and Lu is the princess of the Li family and the daughter-in-law of the Wu family, there is no need for her to curry favor with Wan. Why do you think she did this?" Gu Zhuting's eyes flickered, and she said in a low voice, "Ah Lang is saying that Princess Enlil is also involved in this matter?" Yang Fan nodded lightly and said in a low voice, "Very likely." Gu Zhuting's expression changed. If Princess Enlil was involved in this matter, then it wouldn't be easy to handle. Gu Zhuting thought for a while and said doubtfully, "But why did Princess Enlil participate in this matter? Why did she hurt Sister Wan and Zhang Changzong? She should hate Ah Lang. She doesn't know the relationship between Ah Lang and Sister Wan." Yang Fan said, "Don't forget her brother Li Zhongruan and sister Princess Yongtai died because of Zhang Changzong." "Ah," Gu Zhuting exclaimed, "she wants to use this matter to avenge her brother and sister." Yang Fan said, "That can only be the reason. Otherwise, why would she participate in it? She had no enmity with Wan. Now that she was conspiring with Du Wentian, it could only be because they had a common enemy. I've always thought that this Li Guo has no redeeming qualities. I didn't expect that for the sake of her brother and sister's blood feud, she didn't hesitate to attack Zhang Er." When Yang Fan said these words, his tone inevitably had a hint of admiration. Zhang was the Empress's most beloved gigolo. After the death of Li Zhongruan and Wu Yanji, although the Wu and Li families hated Zhang to the core, they were afraid of the Empress. Other than mobilizing the imperial censors to send a few impeachment memorials, they did not do anything else. They were really lacking in courage. Unexpectedly, in the end, it was this despised Li Guo, who schemed and schemed to avenge her brother and sister. Yang Fan also had a blood feud and naturally admired Princess Enli's actions. However, Enli's tools of revenge were Wanner and the child in her womb. They were all his closest relatives. Naturally, he couldn't just stand by and do nothing just because he admired Enli's actions. Yang Fan paced slowly and muttered to himself for a long time. Suddenly, he asked Gu Zhuting, "When did Mr. Musei Wanner will give birth?" Yang Fan's change of topic was too fast. Gu Zhuting was stunned at first, and then replied, "Mr. Mu said that Sister Wanner will give birth in about 10 days. Mr. Mu's name was Mu Hui. He was a famous doctor in Chang'an. However, what was not known was that he was also a member of the Successor Hall. The talents recruited by the Succession Hall included people from all walks of life, and this Mu Hui was one of them. However, Mu Hui himself did not know that he belonged to the Successor Hall. He only knew that he belonged to a powerful force. In the Successor Hall, other than a small number of core people, the rest were mostly in the game and could not see the whole picture. They did not know what organization they were in, and naturally had no way of talking about the purpose of the organization's existence. As for the various professions, the Successor Hall was even more mysterious. This was because it used its position and ability as the upper echelon to indirectly control and influence the various professions. Those professions did not even feel that there was a huge force in the world influencing and controlling everything. When some professions made a certain choice based on the current situation and court politics, they thought that it was a decision they had made on their own initiative. However, they did not know that the basis that influenced their decision was created or provided to them by the Successor Hall. The Successor Hall used this method to ensure their mysteriousness. In this era, giving birth was undoubtedly a matter of life and death for a woman. Yang Fan did not dare to be careless. Because Wanner's identity could not be revealed to the public, he used the famous doctor from the Successor Hall. Even so, every time he invited him to take Wanner's pulse, he would be blindfolded. Even when taking the pulse, he could not see the patient. As for the midwife waiting to give birth, there was no need to go outside to invite someone. Gu Zhuting could do it. In the beginning, when she was carrying out a mission, she pretended to be a midwife's apprentice for a long time. She learned the skill of midwifery during that time. After listening to Gu Zhuting's words, Yang Fan muttered to himself. 10 days, 10 days. Yang Fan suddenly felt a little upset. Could it be that something unexpected would happen in these 10 days? Yang Fan sat down and thought for a long time without saying anything. Seeing this, Gu Zhuting motioned for everyone to leave. She fetched a cup of water and gently brought it to Yang Fan. Yang Fan did not take the cup of water. Instead, he gently took her wrist and pulled her into his arms. Gu Zhuting twisted her body in embarrassment and said, "Ah Lang, outside the hall there is someone." Yang Fan was stunned for a moment before he burst into laughter. He gently slapped Gu Zhuting's plump buttocks and said with a smile, "What are you thinking about? I have something to ask you." Gu Zhuting thought that Ah Lang was distracted and had come up with an absurd idea. She could not help but feel a little embarrassed. But it turned out that she was wrong and became even more embarrassed. Yang Fan pretended not to see her embarrassment and seriously asked, "Little Ting, if I ask you to disguise yourself as Wan'er, can you do it?" Gu Zhuting slightly restrained her embarrassment and slightly frowned. She shook her head and said, "Ah Lang, how can there be such a miraculous disguise technique in this world? It's not a disguise technique, but magic. I can disguise myself as someone else, but I can't completely impersonate someone else." Yang Fan originally only had a glimmer of hope, but after hearing her words, he could not help but sigh softly. When he secretly received the Prince of Luling back to the capital in Fangzhou, Gu Zhuting and the Prince of Luling disguised themselves not only to deceive the pursuers, but also to deceive their own people. But at that time, both the real and fake Prince of Luling had disguised themselves as a middle-aged man who looked 60 to 70% similar to the Prince of Luling's real appearance. At that time, the reason for doing so was very reasonable. They were hiding from the pursuers. So, of course, the Prince of Luling had to disguise himself. In the beginning, he was able to hide from Princess Taiping in the Dragon Gate because Princess Taiping and her brother had not seen each other for 16 years. The tough imprisonment had turned the high-spirited young emperor into an old and haggard, middle-aged man. As for the time when Gu Zhuting pretended to be Yang Fan, it was only somewhat similar. When they walked on the long street, they were surrounded by his bodyguards. Bystanders could only watch from a distance, and at that time there were no acquaintances in front of them, so the people who saw him had a preconceived impression. Later, when they visited him, they saw that he was indeed wounded by an arrow, so naturally they would not suspect anything. But now Wu Chongxuan and his wife had seen Shanghai Wanner a few months ago. Although Gu Zhuting's disguise technique was miraculous, she could not completely disguise herself as someone they knew. Moreover, Wanner was elegant and noble with a scholarly charm, so it was very difficult to imitate her. Since this method was not feasible, Yang Fan could only dispel this whimsical idea and think of another way. There were a few wild flowers that could be seen everywhere on the island, a crystal, clear jade bottle with a thin neck, and a small pair of scissors. After Wanner trimmed the branches and inserted the cut wild flowers into the jade bottle, the pink or blue flowers, coupled with a few fresh green branches and leaves, became an appropriate scenery. As Yang Fan watched her arrange the flowers, he told her what he knew about the situation. Wanner looked at the flowers in the bottle, put down the scissors, and turned to Yang Fan, saying, "And Lu has no reason to visit. The reason why I am vigilant is because of this. Now, listening to what you said, I am afraid that she is indeed related to this matter. She came to visit me, presumably to verify whether what Du Wentian said is true." Yang Fan nodded and said, "I think so too. Although Enli's visit is inexplicable, since she is here, you have no reason not to see her. You did not see her, so she naturally believed Du Wentian's words." Wanner said, so she began to act. Spreading rumors must be the first step of her plan. Yang Fan said, "That's right. Her target should be Zhang Changzong, but she does not know that the emperor already knows that you are pregnant. She thinks that exposing this matter will make the empress angry and embarrassed, and then she will execute Zhang Changzong like she executed Xue Huai. She does not know that Zhang Changzong will definitely be safe and sound, and only you will be implicated." Wanner raised her pretty eyebrows and said with confusion, "But what can she do? As long as I do not see her, what can she do to me?" Yang Fan said, "This is exactly what I can't figure out no matter how much I think about it. However, this matter concerns your life and the child's life. No matter what, I cannot be careless. I must be cautious." Wanner smiled slightly. There was some helplessness in her smile, but more of it was dependence and sweetness for Yang Fan. She gently snuggled into Yang Fan's arms and said softly, "I originally thought that this matter could be resolved without bothering Lang Jun, who knew that when I came to Chang, and I would encounter such a matter. In the end, Lang Jun still has to worry." Yang Fan rebuked, "What are you saying? You are my woman. Of course, the matter between you and the child should be handled by me." Wanner nodded meekly and said, "Since I am by your side, I will not care about anything. Everything will be decided by Lang Jun. Who told you to be my man?" Yang Fan chuckled and gently pressed his cheek against hers. There was a feeling of peace and sweetness in his heart. After a while, Yang Fan softly broke the warm silence. "I plan to pick a time to visit Wu Chongxuan." Wanner revealed a slightly surprised expression and asked, "Is this necessary?" Yang Fan said, "I have already visited the prince of Xiang's 5 sons. There is nothing wrong with visiting Wu Chongxuan. However, I will send someone to keep an eye on him. I will pick a time when Wu Chongxuan is not at home to visit him." Wanner suddenly said, "Lang Jun wants to see Princess Anil?" Yang Fan said, "That's right. I wanted to sound her out. Although she is crafty, she is only clever in small matters. How shrewd could she be? If I go see her, I might be able to grasp some clues. Perhaps I can guess what she wants to do." Wanner's eyes flickered, and she said, "If Royal Prince Gaoyang is not at home, how will Princess Enel see you?" Yang Fan naturally would not confess his ill-fated relationship with Li Guerrer to Wanner. He only laughed and said, "Mountain people have their own clever plans." Wanner did not ask any more questions. She gently nodded and said, "Then Lang Jun should go and try. If it really doesn't work, don't forget that there is still Zhang Changzong." Yang Fan understood and said, "I understand. In the Jianghu who can remain aloof. Besides, this matter started because of him. If necessary, I will ask Zhang Fengqin to come out of seclusion and borrow his swift blade." Chapter 1031. In the afternoon light, 2 sturdy black oxen slowly pulled an oil-walled carriage along Vermilion Bird Avenue. Thin bamboo curtains hung over the windows. Strands of clear light seeped in through the gaps in the curtains, allowing the bustling sounds of the street to be heard. A pair of embroidered lotus shoes were neatly placed in front of the couch. Gu Zhuting, wearing only a pair of white socks, was curled up on the couch like a cat. Her delicate body was shrouded in a dress, so only a pair of delicate feet could be seen. Every now and then, those delicate feet would twitch, a reaction caused by Yang Fan's large hands occasionally harassing her. The two had just become husband and wife and were in the heat of their passion. Gu Zhuting had a shy and sensitive constitution, but she did not dare to defy Yang Fan in the slightest. As a result, Yang Fan especially liked to bully her, seeing her shy and afraid, yet still having to submit to his adversity, pitifully. Even though this was the busiest and most bustling Vermilion Bird Avenue in Chang, and the oil-purifying vehicles with their curtains hanging down formed a relatively independent and secret space. Listening to the noise and hawking outside and making her happy, it was really a different kind of fun. Don't. Ah Lang! Gu Zhuting suddenly let out a delicate cry and shrank back. Her slender body was as taut as a bow, and her perky buttocks formed a round and graceful curve under her light yellow dress. Her soft hands also reached out to grab Yang Fan's large hands and began to plead in a low voice. Her husband's actions were getting more and more excessive. This was a street, and she truly could not hold back her embarrassment. Yang Fan had always wanted to tease her not to be so licentious. Now that he had achieved his goal, he couldn't help but laugh and let go of this flying heroine who was always like a pitiful child in front of him. He stretched out his hand and pulled on the purple rope hanging from the carriage wall, pulling the curtain aside a little. The carriage instantly lit up and the hawkers became even clearer. Yang Fan leaned his back against the carriage wall and let out a long sigh. Today he was going to visit Wu Chongxuan. Today Wei Du and the other Guanlong clans acted as hosts, holding a banquet at Tsuchi's Hibiscus restaurant, inviting the prince of Xiang's 5 sons and Wu Chongxuan, Zhang Changzong, Shanghai Wan as well as the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of Revenue, the Ministry of Justice, the Supreme Court, and other officials from the capital who had been sent to Chang, and in advance had all received invitations. At this time, Wu Chongxuan was not in the residence, so Yang Fan came. This time, the patriarchs of the 2 great clans of Wei and Du had gathered all the influential gentry of Chang, and invited the nobles and officials of the capital to a banquet. This was tantamount to the gentry of Chang, and welcoming the emperors, moved to the capital and publicly declaring their stance. Wu Chongxuan, the prince of Xiang's 5 sons, Zhang Changzong, Qin Dong, Hu Yuanli, and the others had all gladly attended the banquet. Shanghai Wan naturally declined. Ever since Wan arrived in Chang, and she rarely interacted with the local officials, gentry, and nobles. However, her reaction was not unexpected because she was a female official. Even though her reputation, status, and even power and influence were no longer limited to the internal court, she was still a 6th-level female official in terms of status. It was very sensitive for officials of the internal court to have close relations with factions outside the palace, especially since she was not at the Son of Heaven's side, so she had to avoid suspicion. Yang Fan was also not invited because he was a military general. A military general had limited influence in court politics, and the gentry of Chang, and did not need to wholeheartedly befriend them. Moreover, befriending a military general was just as sensitive as befriending an internal official. It was very easy for rumors to spread, so he was also not invited. The scenery of the streets flashed by through the gap in the curtain. Yang Fan's thoughts gradually calmed down. He did not know if this trip to Princess Annel's residence would give him the answer he wanted, but he had to try. This matter concerned the safety of his woman and his child, so he had to actively respond. He needed to understand just what Liguerre was planning. Although he had already sent people to secretly monitor Liguerre's every move, there were many things that Liguerre did not need to personally appear. She only needed to formulate a plan and then order her subordinates to carry it out. Yang Fan could not possibly monitor all the servants of the princess's residence. Once he waited for Princess Annel to personally appear, it would be the time to reveal his true intentions. It was hard to predict whether he would be able to react in time. A flash of light passed through the gap in the carriage and shone between his brows and the high bridge of his nose. It divided his face into two parts. One part was dark because the walls of the carriage blocked the light. The other part was divided by the bamboo curtain into alternating light and dark, making his appearance seem somewhat mysterious. Yang Fan gazed in a daze out the window. Nothing he saw in front of him entered his heart. His thoughts were completely immersed in his heart. He was thinking about Annel's plot and searching for a solution. He had to assess the consequences if he failed. He had to estimate the reactions of the various factions and the effect it would have on the future situation. His identity, Wan Er's identity, and Zhang Changzong's identity determined that this matter that had started with a personal grudge would not end with a personal success or failure. No matter how this matter was resolved, it would not only affect his family. What kind of position one was in would naturally affect what kind of influence there was. Only now did he deeply understand why it was said, "The emperor has no family matters." Right now, he was like an uncrowned king. His every action had far-reaching effects. Pulling one hair could affect the entire situation. It was said, one movement and one stillness are like the wind and clouds. One joy and one anger are like thunder. Gu Zhuting rested her head on his lap and stared foolishly at his handsome appearance of deep thought. Her eyes were filled with lingering love. Just now, in order to avoid Yang Fan's sneak attack on her vitals, her body had been bent like a bow and her perky bottom was hanging off the bed. Only now did she quietly shrink back and lay contentedly on his body like a kitten. Gu Zhuting was very satisfied with everything she had now and treasured everything she had now. Not so long ago, she had been a lowly servant, a cold-blooded killer. She did not want her descendants to repeat her life. She had long predicted her tragic fate, so she vowed not to marry. But now, she had a man who doted on her and loved her. She had a happy and stable family. Not only could she be a happy little woman, she could also have the right to be a mother. She treasured all of this. Bystanders could not imagine just how satisfied and happy she was at this moment. Those pampered daughters of noble families would sit in their rooms and lean on the embroidered bed, being meticulously taken care of. They would read legendary novels and be incomparably envious of those female flying heroes and female swordsmen who freely roamed the Jianghu, happily settling debts of gratitude and enmity. But for her, everything she had now was extremely precious. She especially treasured everything she had now. She knew that everyone in this family was a part of her happiness, so she loved the house and its dog. She was willing to give everything she had for her family, but she also knew that some things could not be solved with simple violence. She was a killer. She was proficient in all kinds of killing techniques and could deal with all kinds of tricks in the Jianghu. But the imperial court and the Jianghu were two completely different worlds. In this world, she was as innocent as a newborn baby. She could not share more of her man's burden. All she could do was not let her man worry about her anymore. She wanted to give him more joy, stay by his side, and protect his safety. She was like a small fish that had finally found a quiet bay. No matter how big the Jianghu was, it had nothing to do with her. Her world was already here. The ox cart was already moving slowly, but now it was even slower, because someone was setting up a stage to perform on the long street. Many people had gathered around to watch. Sitting in the cart, Yang Fan immediately saw the stage in the middle of the crowd. Coincidentally, he also saw Elder Mo Guan. Magic tricks were a novelty, so they frequently changed the performance venue to attract more people who had not seen their performance before. This way they could earn more money. When Yang Fan saw them, he seemed to have thought of something. His brows furrowed into a frown. Gu Zhuting wanted to stretch out her hand and use her gentle fingertips to iron out the wrinkles between his eyebrows, but she did not dare to. Yang Fan's eyes flashed. He suddenly lowered his head and whispered in her ear. Gu Zhuting listened carefully and nodded slightly from time to time. The ox cart slowly bypassed the crowd and continued to move forward. When the cart passed by the next square, the curtain was lifted and a strong figure jumped out of the cart. This person was dressed in green. He was tall and had an ordinary appearance. He was a middle-aged man who was about 30 years old. He dusted his robe and wiped the beard on his lips. Then he elegantly walked towards the crowd of people who were watching the magic trick performance. Yang Fan watched Gu Zhuting's back disappear into the crowd and gently put down the curtain. The lotus-colored chiffon covered the intricately carved bed frame. The chiffon fluttered down like a cloud, and the white and naked beauties' curves could be seen at a glance. Du Wentian excitedly held the fragrant buttocks and gritted his teeth as if he had seen an irreconcilable enemy. The sound of the embroidery bed was endless, but the palace maids had already moved far away, and no one could hear the sound that would cause people to have wild and fanciful thoughts. The palace maids had long been suspicious of the unusual interaction between the young master of the Du family and their princess, but no one dared to say anything. They were the dowry maids of the princess, and they knew very well how the husband of the prince consort was subservient to the princess. Moreover, the master and the mistress were the princess and the prince consort. No matter which side they stood on, they would not have a good ending. The only way to protect themselves was to pretend to be deaf and mute. Du Wentian was in a frenzy of passion. That kind of extreme pleasure, both psychological and physical, was something that he could not obtain from any other woman. This was because the woman under his crotch was a noble princess. Even if other women were more beautiful than her, it was impossible for them to have her noble status. However, it was also because of her noble status and beautiful appearance that gave him a feeling of supreme bliss. Thus, when he had an affair with this princess, she was never satisfied. Du Wentian had long been emptied of his body by wine and women. When he had an affair, he either had the heart but lacked the strength, or he would hastily finish it. He had already sensed the princess' dissatisfaction. In the past, no matter how delicious the women he had obtained were, as long as he was satisfied and happy, he did not need to consider the other party's feelings. However, this time it was not possible, so he could only find another way. Yesterday, when he heard that Prince Consort was going to attend the banquet at the Chu Chi, Du Wentian immediately made preparations. He had Chunjia spend a lot of money to buy him a medicine to liven up the mood. Before he came, he even defecated himself in the toilet so that he wouldn't get too excited and end things carelessly. After entering the screen, he had to use his tongue to serve for a long time before he pulled the saddle and mounted the horse. Now he had been galloping on the horse for the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, but he was still as vigorous as before. He could not help but feel proud of himself. Li Guerre's interest was aroused by his unexpected performance, but she always felt that there was still a little bit to go deeper and more substantial, so she could not help but take the initiative to cater to him. Li Guerre's perfectly round buttocks followed his movements skillfully and cleverly moved to meet him. Unfortunately, this great general could only ride a carefree horse. Li Guerre only moved slightly to meet him, but he felt his spinal cord go numb and suddenly spasm. "Don't stop!" Ligueur cried out, but it was too late. Ligueur gritted her teeth and angrily straightened her body. She threw Du Wentian, who was lying on her back like a dead dog, onto the couch and scolded. "What a useless piece of trash!" Ligueur resentfully got off the couch, put on a thin gauze, and walked around the screen without looking back. Behind the screen was another room, and there was a corner door decorated with flowers and murals on the wall. Ligueur pushed open the corner door and entered a bathroom. The bathtub was filled with hot water, and the water was sprinkled with bright flower petals. Ligueur took off her light robe and dipped it into the water. She angrily shouted, "Servants!" There was another door outside the bathroom, and 2 palace maids in short sleeves were already waiting outside. Hearing the sound, they quickly came in and served the princess as she bathed. Du Wentian dejectedly climbed up, and while secretly cursing the quack doctor for deceiving him, he weakly put on his clothes and walked out from the other door. Yang Fan's carriage slowly stopped in front of the Du residence. Yang Fan held the invitation card in his hand and walked up the stairs. He grabbed the door knocker and knocked. The prince consort was not in the residence, but Yang Fan was sure that Ligueur would definitely know of his arrival. This was because this was the princess residence and not the prince consort's residence. There had always been a princess residence in the world. Being the prince consort meant being a son-in-law. Even if Wu Chongxuan had the title of a Junwang, it was still the same. The princess was the royal family. Wu Qingxi and Wu Sanxi had worked hard for more than 10 years. They had always wanted the Wu family to become a royal family, but because Wu Zetian hadn't chosen any of the Wu family's nephews as the crown prince, they had never been able to cross this threshold. Because of this, even though Wu Chongxuan was a Junwang, he was married to Enlug, and his residence could only be called the princess residence. This was not just a matter of title. It also meant that the owner of this residence was the princess. The Guanlong family had invited Wu Chongxuan to a banquet, but the invitation could not be directly given to Wu Chongxuan. Instead, it had to be given to Princess Enlu. This was etiquette. One of the maids serving Ligueur as she bathed was kneeling in the courtyard. Her cheeks were red and swollen from being slapped by a fierce-looking mammy. Another maid was kneeling on the ground, trembling with fear and trepidation. Ligueur's anger was ignited, but she could not vent it because Du Wentian was too useless. Her temper inevitably became irritable. At first, she disliked the maid for being too gentle, but when she used a bit more force, she complained that it hurt her skin. She could not help but vent her anger on this unlucky maid. The housekeeper of the princess residence walked over with an invitation. When he saw the situation, he knew that the princess was not in a good mood and could not help but feel nervous. When he was still about 10 feet away from her, he stopped and carefully reported, "Princess, General Zhongwu Yang Fan has come to visit the prince consort." Yang Fan? Ligueur turned to look at her and muttered to herself in confusion, "Why does he want to see the prince consort?" Ligueur thought about it and ordered, "Invite him to the guest hall. This princess will go see him immediately." The housekeeper agreed and quickly slipped away. Ligueur looked at the little palace made with swollen cheeks and bleeding from the corner of her mouth. She said fiercely, "Continue to hit her. Teach her a lesson." She then shook her sleeve and shouted, "Servants, help this princess change my clothes." Chapter 1032. Yang Fan clasped his hands behind his back and leisurely looked around the living room he was in. This living room had white stone steps and a vermilion lacquer door. In the hall, there was a table, a pillar, and a plaque, all of which were ancient. On the walls of the 2 rooms, there were several freehand landscapes, painted in ink. On the pillar in the middle of the hall, there was a couplet that read, "There are 3 parts of water, for parts of bamboo, 7 parts of bright moon. From the 5-step tower, 10 steps of the pavilion, 100 steps of cool breeze." Although the hall was deep, the windows were wide open, reflecting a bright light without the slightest hint of darkness. Outside the window, the rockery and wisteria were overflowing with greenery. Its natural charm complemented the simple and ancient style of the hall. Whether it was a stone or wood outside the hall or a pillar or a beam in the hall, they all carried a special flavor left behind by time, showing a special kind of solemnity and solemnity. With Yang Fan's current financial resources, he could also decorate such a hall. But even if he built it exactly the same as this guest hall, even if there was no difference between the curtains and the bonsai, he would not be able to create the flavor of this hall. This flavor was accumulated in this hall for more than 200 years. It was not something that could be replicated by artificial means. This was the old house of the Du family. Every brick, tile, grass, and wood had a story, but Liguer did not like it very much. But this was her temporary place to live. It was not good for her to make any changes. If this was her house, the furnishings in the hall would be inlaid with gold and jade, and the curtains would also be made of silk and silk, extremely extravagant to suit her taste. It's rare for General Yang to visit my humble home. What a surprise! Following a teasing remark, Liguer slowly walked out from behind the screen. The crimson gauze dress and the light yellow skirt made her waist slender and chest straight. Her wet hair was playfully tied up, and her face was elegant and otherworldly, like the first green on the top of a mountain in spring. At this time, she was not painted in red, nor decorated with jade or gold, but because of this, she revealed a kind of unadorned elegance. Even if he hated her character, Yang Fan could not help but have his eyes brighten when he saw her, secretly praising this woman's extraordinary beauty. What? Liguer saw the appreciation in Yang Fan's eyes and couldn't help but feel happy. She stood gracefully and looked at Yang Fan with a smile, spun around and said, "Am I beautiful?" Yang Fan restrained the admiration in his eyes and cupped his hands towards her, saying, "This Yang greets your highness." Liguer raised her chin and snorted softly. She walked past him and purposely brushed her fragrant dress against his robes. She stood still in front of him and said, "Is General Yang here to look for my husband? It's a pity he's not at home today. He went to Tsuchi to drink." Yang Fan followed her and turned around. Looking at her black hair, he said in a low voice, "The so-called visit to Prince Consort Wu is just an excuse. Princess has always been intelligent. Could it be that you can't guess that this Yang has come for your highness?" Liguer raised her eyebrows and said, "What are you looking for me for?" As she asked, she couldn't help feeling nervous in her heart. It can't be. Could it be that he found out about the rumor that Du Wentian had people spread so quickly? And he found out about it on me? Yang Fan said in a low voice, "This Yang has been entrusted by Zhang Fengqin to ask your highness about something." Liguer was stunned. She suddenly turned around and faced him. She said in shock, "Zhang Changzong, what does he want to ask me?" The purpose of Yang Fan's visit today was to beat the grass and scare the snake. When Yang Fan said this, he was paying attention to her reaction. As long as her expression changed, it would be impossible to hide it from his eyes. However, Liguer's surprised expression was not fake at all. Seeing this, Yang Fan couldn't help but think, could it be that I'm being overly suspicious? Does the rumor that Du Wentian spread have nothing to do with her? If that's the case, then I don't need to worry so much. I just need to teach that Du Wentian a lesson and let him know how powerful he is. From then on, he will shut up. Yang Fan didn't know that this was because when Du Wentian carried out Liguer's orders, he had secretly changed the adulterer's name. He suddenly mentioned Zhang Changzong. If Liguer knew the details, of course, she would have some reaction. However, in Liguer's heart, she still thought that the male lead in the rumor was him, Yang Fan. When Yang Fan suddenly mentioned Zhang Changzong, of course she would be puzzled. In that instant, hundreds of thoughts ran through both of their minds. When Yang Fan thought about how Liguer went to visit Wanner on the island in the middle of the lake, he still couldn't let it go. He wanted to probe again, but there were still 4 palace maids standing in the corner of the hall. Just now, the 2 of them didn't speak loudly. If he continued to speak quietly, he was afraid that it would arouse suspicion. Thinking of this, Yang Fan laughed and said, "This matter is a long story. Can I discuss it with Princess in private?" Liguer originally thought that he was here because of the rumor in the marketplace. She didn't expect him to suddenly mention Zhang Changzong. No matter how hard Liguer tried, she couldn't figure out what there was to talk about between her and Zhang Changzong. Her curiosity was piqued, and she said, "If that's the case, please follow me to the small study room to talk." This small study room was next to the living room, hidden behind a screen. The furnishings in the small study room were naturally more luxurious than the living room, and as graceful as possible. Liguer brushed her skirt and sat down on the Luohan couch. Her elbow rested on the Kong table. Her left foot landed on the footstool, and her right leg crossed over her left knee. Under her skirt, a delicate and cute embroidered shoe was revealed, swaying gently. This posture in front of a man other than her husband was unavoidably a little inappropriate, but with her slender waist bent, it made her waist look like a restraint. With the embroidered shoe swaying lightly, she looked even more mischievous and cute. Liguer rested her chin on her hand and glanced at Yang Fan with a smile that wasn't a smile. She said, "Well, there's no one else here other than you and me. If you have anything to say, feel free to say it." She didn't ask Yang Fan to sit down. Towards Yang Fan, she naturally didn't need any hospitality. Yang Fan slowly walked to the chair opposite her. There was a table beside the chair, and on the table was a green muslin window. On both sides of the window was a pair of couplets which read, "Don't be arrogant, you will have your own creation. Everything is decided by heaven. Why bother using traps?" Yang Fan skimmed through this pair of couplets before turning around. He calmly lifted the hem of his robe and sat down on the chair. He calmly said, "Zhang Fengqin clearly knows the real reason why Shangguan Daiji was sent to Chang'an." When Liguer heard the 4 words Shangguan, her expression suddenly changed. He really knows. Du Wentian, this idiot. Not only is he useless in bed, he is even more useless in doing things. He actually let others find him so quickly. If it weren't for the fact that I really have no one to use in Chang, and I wouldn't have used this useless person no matter what. Liguer's sudden change in expression was naturally seen by Yang Fan. He finally confirmed that Liguer must have been involved in this matter. Yang Fan slowly said, "Shangguan Daiji has been serving the emperor since he was 14 years old. For many years, he has been the person that His Majesty relies on and trusts the most. That is why His Majesty cares for Shangguan Daiji so much. Your Highness should be clear about this." Liguer sneered and raised her eyebrows. Since the matter had already been exposed, there was no need for her to hide it any more. She sneered and said, "So what?" Yang Fan said, "His Majesty is also very clear about the cause and effect of Shangguan Daiji's matter. His Majesty sent Shangguan Daiji to Chang, and out of care and concern. Because this matter is extremely secretive, His Majesty ordered Zhang Fengqin to take care of him in case anything happens. Does the princess understand this matter?" Du Wentian spread the rumor about Shangguan and Zhang Changzong, so Yang Fan didn't think that Liguer's real target was him. He thought that Liguer wanted to use this matter to kill Zhang Changzong. Even though Liguer had 1,000 faults, but in the matter of her avenging her brother and sister, Yang Fan actually admired her very much. But no matter how much he admired her, he had to find a way to dispel Liguer's idea. Because the reason Liguer used to attack Zhang Changzong was the pregnant one. If her plot succeeded, it would harm and the child. Yang Fan's hint was to tell her, "The emperor is already clear about this matter and has already pardoned her. Zhang Changzong is under orders to protect her. If you want to use this matter to make a big fuss, you won't be able to bring down Zhang Changzong. You will only harm Shangguan who has nothing to do with you." But Li Guer thought that the male protagonist of the scandal was Yang Fan himself, so Yang Fan's words naturally didn't have the desired effect. Li Guer thought, "You finally know fear. You actually used Zhang Changzong to pressure me. What kind of friendship do you have with Zhang Changzong? Even if Imperial Grandmother handed this matter over to him, if the scandal is exposed, it won't harm him at all. He has already offended my Li family and the Wu family once, and came to Chang and to avoid trouble. Will he offend the Wu and Li families again for you and Shangguan Waner? Humph. Once Shangguan Wan dies, the power in the palace will all belong to Zhang Changzong. I'm afraid this result is exactly what he wants." Thinking of this, Li Guer proudly asked, "So what if I understand? So what if I don't?" Yang Fan said, "Princess, aren't you afraid of angering Zhang Fengqin?" Li Guer sneered and mocked. "General Yang, do you only know how to use Zhang Changzong to scare people now? Where is the arrogance you showed when you humiliated me in the East City? Where is the prestige you showed when you humiliated me by the Longqing Pond? Why do you keep mentioning Zhang Changzong? If you have the ability, you can continue to contradict me." She proudly stood up and gracefully walked to Yang Fan's side. She reached out and softly hooked her arm around his neck. Her slender waist slightly lowered, which further highlighted the perfect curve of her round and jade-like bottom. Her pearly white teeth bit her red lips, and her eyebrows stretched out into an extremely seductive expression. She seductively looked at Yang Fan and giggled. "You said that I am very cheap. I also feel that I am especially cheap because I like it more and more when you contradict me. The harder you contradict me, the happier I am. Come, let's continue. Perhaps when I am happy I will—" Crash! The trap door opened. Li Guer's round buttocks teasingly moved towards Yang Fan's thighs. She was about to sit, but her sitting posture was stiff in the air. She suddenly turned her head and saw Du Wentian barging in. After Du Wentian left Li Guer's place, he first went to find his attendant, Qinjia, and gave him a torrent of abuse. Du Wentian also knew that this loyal servant would not deliberately cheat him, but he was the one who bought the fake medicine. Du Wentian fiercely scolded Qinjia to vent his anger before returning. As soon as he came back, he heard that Yang Fan had come to visit. Du Wentian went to the living room and looked around. He did not see anyone in the living room, so he quickly went in to ask. He heard from the maids in the living room that the princess and General Yang had entered the small living room. Du Wentian panicked. A single man and a single woman. What were they doing in the small living room? This Du Wentian was also very jealous. Although Li Guer was not his wife, he was not willing to let other men touch her body. This princess's skirt was too loose. Although she and Yang Fan did not seem to be on good terms, but this Yang Fan was handsome and had a tall figure. Who knew if the princess's heart would ripple and bury the hatchet with him? Others did not dare to eavesdrop outside the small study room, but Du Wentian thought that as a guest of the princess he had the right to do so. He quietly snuck outside the small study room and just happened to hear Princess and Lu teasing Yang Fan. For a moment he was burning with jealousy, and without thinking he barged in. When Li Guer saw him, she could not help but feel relieved. She slowly straightened her body and said with a frosty face, "Who let you in?" Du Wentian hurriedly said, "Ah, I was rash. Please forgive me, Princess." Li Guer pointed her slim finger outside and scolded, "Get out!" Du Wentian was not willing to leave, so he randomly found an excuse and said, I am here to ask the princess about something important." How could Li Guer not know what he was thinking? What right did this bastard have to control her? If Yang Fan was not here, Li Guer would have already slapped him. Her almond-shaped eyes were filled with power as she said, "What important matter is it that you do not even care about etiquette?" Du Wentian did not have any important matter. He was just trying to beat around the bush. However, and Lu was not willing to let him go. Du Wentian had a sudden idea and really thought of an excuse. He hurriedly replied, "Ah, isn't the princess going to hold a banquet at Garden on the 8th day of the 6th month to entertain the Chang and officials and celebrities?" I suddenly thought that the officials and nobles are always busy with work. Although there are still 7 or 8 days left, if the invitation is sent out late, I am afraid that they will be busy with work and it will be too hasty. I think it is better to send out the invitation early. What does the princess think? On the 8th day of the 6th month, the Chang and officials and nobles were invited to a banquet at Garden. It was the day that Liguer planned to make things difficult for Yang Fan. However, she did not expect that Du Wentian would actually say this in front of Yang Fan. Although Yang Fan might not know the real purpose of this matter, her expression still changed. In fact, for Du Wentian, he was flustered and could not think of any other excuse at the moment, so he used this as an excuse. In addition, the rumor he spread had nothing to do with Yang Fan, so he did not expect that Yang Fan came today because of that rumor. Liguer angrily and anxiously scolded, "Who said that I am going to hold a banquet for the Chang and officials?" Du Wentian was stunned and said, "The princess intends to cancel the banquet." While saying that, he quickly glanced at Yang Fan, thinking with jealousy and hatred. The princess originally wanted to swindle him as well. Why did she suddenly change her mind? Could it be that the two of them have really put aside their previous enmity and hooked up together? Liguer anxiously denied it, but then she realized that this was a cover-up, so she hurriedly said, "I intend to hold a banquet for the Chang and officials and nobles womenfolk that day. What can happen to these ladies and daughters? Are they afraid that they will not be able to attend the banquet in time? It doesn't matter if the invitation is sent 1 day earlier or 1 day later." Du Wentian laughed dryly and said, "Yes, yes, yes. If so, then there is no hurry to send out the invitation." Although he said this, his feet did not move, determined not to give the two a chance to be alone. At first, Yang Fan really did not pay attention to this matter that Du Wentian mentioned, because since Wu Chongxuan arrived in Chang, and there were already a lot of things to do with the banquet. However, the change in the two's expression and Liguer's denial and hurriedly trying to salvage the situation alerted him. Yang Fan's expression did not change, but his heart was slightly moved. Is there a big reason for the Daxing Garden banquet on the 8th of June? At this time, Wu Chongxuan also returned to the mansion. Wu Chongxuan was half drunk and excitedly returned to the mansion. As soon as he stepped through the second door, he asked a family member who came to greet him, "Where is the princess?" The family member answered, "General Zhongwu, Yang Fan came to visit. Since you are not here, the princess has gone to entertain the guests on your behalf." As soon as Wu Chongxuan heard that Princess Annel had gone to greet Yang Fan on his behalf, he felt very uncomfortable. He hurried to the living room, only to see that the living room was empty. Liguer and Yang Fan were nowhere to be seen. His heart could not help but tighten. He hurriedly asked the maid in the living room, "Where is the princess and Yang Fan?" The maid bowed and answered, "The princess has invited General Zhongwu to the small study room for a chat." What? Wu Chongxuan became anxious as soon as he heard this. Why would a man be invited to the small study room for no reason? If word got out that a man and a woman were to be alone together, it would not be good. Wu Chongxuan strode to the small study room. When he entered the study room, he saw that not only was Yang Fan there, but Du Wentian was also there. Wu Chongxuan immediately relaxed. There were 3 people in the room. What could have happened? He did not know that the 2 brothers in the room were his brothers-in-law. The 2 of them, one after the other, had painted his head. Wu Chongxuan was dressed casually for the banquet. He wore a green veil over his head, a green robe with a crotch missing, and a pair of high boots. The sunlight shone on him through the jade-green gauze window. It was a perfect match for the occasion. Chapter 1033. When Wu Chongxuan wasn't flustered by jealousy, he still had the demeanor of a young master. When he found out why Yang Fan had come and that he had come to pay him a visit, He immediately ordered the servants to prepare a banquet to entertain the guest. Yang Fan's visit today was perfectly justified. Even though he and Wu Yizong were like fire and water, his friendship with Wu Sanxi had not been severed. He could barely be considered half a disciple of King Liang. Now that King Liang's son had come to Chang, and he naturally had to pay a visit to King Liang's heir. Wu Chongxiuan invited Yang Fan to the reception pavilion, where he and Du Wentian accompanied him. Soon, fine wine and delicacies were served, and the three of them began to drink together. Wu Chongxiuan was already quite drunk when he returned from the Chu-Chi. Now that he was drunk again, he began to drink to his heart's content. His self-control was already lacking, and with Yang Fan raising his cup to toast him, he couldn't help but get drunk. By the time the banquet ended, Wu Chongxiuan was so drunk that he couldn't personally see Yang Fan off. He could only force himself to let Du Wentian see Yang Fan off, while he was supported by two eunuchs and staggered back to the inner residence. Yang Fan and Du Wentian walked side by side, neither of them speaking. When they reached the ceremonial gate, Yang Fan stopped and said to Du Wentian, "Young master, please wait a moment." Du Wentian had overheard part of the conversation between Yang Fan and Princess Anil in the small study, so he was certain that there was something unclear going on between the two. He had already regarded Yang Fan as a rival in love and was filled with jealousy. He didn't want to see him off in the first place, so he immediately stood still and cupped his hands. "General Yang, please take care," he said in a perfunctory manner. Yang Fan smiled. "I am indebted to Prince Consort Wu and young master Du's warm hospitality for my visit today. I didn't want Prince Consort Wu to be so drunk, so there are some things I haven't said yet. I'll have to ask young master Du to pass on the message." Du Wentian said coldly, "What message does General Yang want me to pass on?" Yang Fan said, "I heard that the new residence that Princess Anlu has chosen is right next to this Yang's residence. In the future, our two families will be neighbors, so we should visit each other often. Moreover, this Yang and the Liang household are old friends. If Princess and Prince Consort are free, Yang Fan would like to host a banquet on the island in the middle of the lake to invite Princess and Prince Consort." Du Wentian judged him by his own standards and thought that he had not given up on Anlu. His expression immediately changed and said, "Don't worry, General. I will definitely pass on the message." In his heart, however, he had made up his mind that he would never tell Anlu about Yang Fan's invitation. He would also think of a way to slander Yang Fan to prevent the two of them from rekindling their old relationship. Yang Fan saw the change in his expression and knew what was going on. He laughed, cupped his hands, and left. Du Wentian stood at the door and coldly glanced at his back. Without waiting for him to leave, he flicked his sleeves and left. Mo Guan's disciples put in a lot of effort in their performance. There was a sea of people watching on the street, but when it was time to collect the money, more than half of them had left. The young disciple of the illusion group held the gong and sometimes used words to urge the prideful audience not to leave. At other times he nodded and bowed and passed small messages. The gong clanged, and after one round he managed to get a few dozen copper coins. Mo Guan sat in a small dressing tent set up at the corner of the long stage. Looking at the situation outside, he sighed and said, "Performing on the street is not profitable. It's better to go to the brothel to earn some money." A disciple standing beside him said, "Master is right, but we have already gone to the more lively brothel in Chang. There won't be that many customers for a while." Elder Mo nodded and said, "We have been in Chang'an for about a month. After 2 more days, we will go to Taiyuan." At this moment, the young disciple who was holding the gong and begging for money walked to a tall young man with a beautiful mustache. He bent his knees and lowered his head, saying with a smile, "Thank you for the reward, Lang Jun." The young man smiled and casually tossed it. With a clang, the gong in the young disciple's hand sank. The young disciple was in charge of begging for money from the audience every day. Even if it was just a few copper coins, he could estimate the amount based on the slight changes in the weight. When he heard such a heavy sound, he couldn't help but feel annoyed. It's fine if you don't want to reward us. But why did you toss a brick to tease us? Judging from the weight, wasn't it just a brick? How could such a heavy piece be gold? But when the young waiter raised his head and saw what was in the gong, he was immediately tongue-tied. Inside the gong was a glistening yellow biscuit that seemed to be round, yet not round. It sparkled under the sunlight. It was definitely a piece of gold. This guest was really generous. He actually rewarded him with a golden collar. The young disciple was surprised and happy. As if afraid that the guest would go back on his word, he quickly put the gong away and bowed repeatedly while holding it. He repeatedly expressed his thanks. "Thank you, Lang Jun, for the generous reward. Thank you, Lang Jun." The man in green smiled and said, "Take me to see your leader. I have a big deal to discuss with him." "Please, please, this way, please, noble." When the young disciple heard that there was a big deal, he was overjoyed. He didn't care about asking for money anymore, and quickly led the man in green to the side of the tent. In the tent, Elder Mo could also see that the guest had given a generous reward. He was about to stand up and go out to welcome them when the young disciple had already led the man in green in. Mo Guan looked at the gong in the young disciple's hand and saw a glistening yellow piece of gold. His eyes couldn't help but shine with a golden light. He quickly went forward with a face full of smiles and said humbly, "Noble, please take a seat." This old man thanks the noble for the generous reward. The man in green stroked his beard and smiled. "Elder, are you the leader of this illusion class?" Yes. Very good. My surname is Yang Jigu. My family's matriarch's 80th birthday is approaching. As a junior, I want to make some rare things to please her." When Mo Guan heard the 3 words matriarch, he knew that the person was from an official's family. For the matriarch to be called a matriarch, her children and grandchildren must be at least a 5th-rank official. His expression became even more respectful as he quickly said, "Lang Jun, do you want this old man's illusion troupe to perform at your residence?" Yang Jigu shook his head and said, "No. I want to learn some illusionary tricks and put them on at the matriarch's birthday banquet." Since ancient times, there was a saying that old Lizy used colorful clothes to entertain his relatives, to make the matriarch happy as a grandson. Why would I be afraid of playing an actor? Mo Guan smiled and said, "Lang Jun's filial piety is commendable. May I know what tricks Lang Jun wants to learn?" Yang Jigu said, "To be honest, I know some illusionary tricks and have demonstrated them to the matriarch in the past. Therefore, my matriarch will not be interested in ordinary tricks. If I want to learn, I will learn what you are best at." When Elder Mo heard this, he couldn't help but hesitate. Although this guest was generous and would definitely reward him if he taught him tricks, this was his skill after all. How could he easily show it to others? Seeing his hesitation, Yang Jigu couldn't help but laugh. "Elder, don't tell me that you think I want to secretly learn your skills. I am a scholar and will take the imperial examination to become an official in the future. Do you think I will become a street performer? Moreover, I only want to learn one skill from you. I can't take away your rice bowl." As he said this, he waved his hand lightly in front of the table. 3 glistening yellow gold collars appeared on the table without a sound. Elder Mo's eyes lit up. It wasn't because Yang Jigu's technique was magical. Although his technique was ingenious, it was not enough in the eyes of an illusionary master like Mo Guan. He saw the 3 gold collars and became greedy at the sight of money. Yang Jigu asked with a smile, "How is it?" Mo Guan swallowed his saliva and said in a low voice, "Lang Jun, we Jianghu performers also have our own rules. This illusion trick is mysterious. Lang Jun's request is really a bit." Yang Jigu waved his hand, and the 3 gold collars on the table became 6. Yang Jigu stared at him and said, "How about this? 6 pieces of gold in exchange for one of your skills." This Elder Mo was still hesitant, but his disciple was a little impatient. He called out in a low voice, "Master!" Yang Jigu said, "One spell can't support an entire troop. You can't be thinking that I can steal your rice bowl just because I learned one of your skills, right? Moreover, with Yang's identity, would he do such a thing? I can guarantee you that if I learn this skill of yours, it will only be to make the matriarch happy. I won't teach it to anyone else in the future." Elder Mo said awkwardly, "Nothing in illusion is real or fake. If you want to turn illusion into reality and falsehood into truth, you need to have a very high level of skill. This requires a long period of hard training. Even if I tell you the trick, I'm afraid you won't be able to learn it quickly." Yang Jigu said, "You don't have to worry about this. Whether I can learn it or not, that's my own business. As long as you are willing to teach me wholeheartedly." Mo Guan smacked his lips and said in a low voice, "Lang Jun, can I add one more?" He also felt that he was a little too greedy and didn't have much confidence in what he said. Yang Jigu didn't say anything. He just raised his hand and there were 3 dang, dang, dang sounds. 3 more pieces of gold fell on the table. The golden light was dazzling and shone brightly. Mo Guan was excited. He pressed the gold pieces and asked with a trembling voice, "What do you want to learn?" Yang Jigu said word by word, "Head-changing technique." The sun was setting in the west, and the city was covered in red. The servant of Long Qing workshop was about to close the door when he saw a fast horse galloping from afar. On the horse was a man in green who was very agile. The servant stopped in his tracks and only left the door half open, waiting for the man in green to come. The horse did not stop for even a moment. When it arrived at the front of the workshop, it saw a man in green, about 30 years of age. He had a beautiful mustache and was full of vigor. The man in green saw the worker waiting in front of the door and laughed at him. In a clear voice, he said, "Thanks." He tossed a shiny object to the worker's feet. The servant looked down and saw that it was a silver coin. The servant was surprised and happy. He quickly picked it up and turned his head to look. The horse was already galloping in the direction of Longqing Pond. The servant shouted at the back of the man, "Thanks." Then he closed the door with a smile. The man in green quickly arrived on the island and quickly appeared in front of Yang Fan. Yang Fan sat next to a lamp tree. There was a small table in front of him. There were 4 kinds of delicate dishes on the table that were steaming. Seeing him come in, he smiled and said, "I was worried that you wouldn't come back tonight. Sit down and take a rest. Let's eat and talk." The man in green was surprised. "Lang hasn't eaten yet?" he asked. Although he still looked like a man, the voice was obviously Gu Zhuting's. Yang Fan said, "I'm waiting for you. If you haven't come back by the time the door closes, I'll eat alone." Gu Zhuting's heart warmed. She wanted to take off her disguise first, but now that she knew Lang hadn't eaten yet, she was afraid that he would be hungry. She quickly washed her hands and rushed to his side. Yang Fan prepared a plate of dishes for her and half a bowl of rice porridge for her. He smiled and asked, "You're back so soon. Have you learned it?" A proud look appeared in Gu Zhuting's eyes. Mo Banju said that he had been Shifu's assistant for 3 years. He also received Shifu's personal guidance and practiced hard for half a year before he was able to use this illusion technique. Therefore, he told me that even if I knew the secret and the technique, it would be very difficult for me to learn it in a short time. However, I'm proficient in jujitsu and stealth skills, some of which are similar to illusions. I've already understood the trick of this technique. As long as I'm given a few days to prepare and practice, I'll be able to use it freely. Yang Fan was overjoyed. "Ha ha," he said. "You've mastered one technique and you've mastered 100 techniques. Speaking of which, this is the same principle as when I first learned Kuju. Even if I have never practiced Kuju, as long as I understand its principle, I can immediately become a Kuju master." The 2 of them talked while eating. The 4 dishes were very light. Obviously, they were prepared according to Gu Zhuting's taste. Gu Zhuting noticed that Yang Fan didn't eat much. She felt uneasy and asked, "Are these dishes not to Ah Lang's taste?" "That's not it," Yang Fan said with a smile. "It's just that I had some wine today, so I'm not too hungry. Otherwise, how could I not have an appetite with a beauty like you by my side? Not to mention the fact that this dish is extremely delicious." Gu Zhuting lowered her head shyly and said, "Ah Lang, you're making fun of me again." Uft! Yang Fan burst into laughter. Gu Zhuting blushed, not knowing what she said wrong. She could only ask in embarrassment, "Ah Lang, what are you laughing at?" Yang Fan pointed at her, swaying back and forth as he said, "It's really weird for a man to be so shy and timid. Ha ha! I've already ordered someone to prepare hot water. You can take a bath first." Only then did Gu Zhuting remember that she was still dressed as a man, with 2 strokes of mustache above her lips. She couldn't help but jump up, thinking that she was still pretending to be cute in front of Ah Lang with such an ugly appearance. Gu Zhuting was so ashamed that she quickly ran away in panic. The bathroom was steaming and the water was ready. There were many flower petals scattered on the surface of the water, hidden in the mist as if they were flowers growing on the water. Gu Zhuting was very happy to see Ah Lang's thoughtfulness. She tore off her mustache and untied her hair. While undressing, she suddenly smiled. She suddenly remembered what Yang Fan said just now. She was obviously dressed as a man just now. So how could she be considered a feast for the eyes? Her Lang Jun was indeed teasing her. She took off her clothes, then took off her underwear, revealing a graceful and beautiful body. Gu Zhuting held onto the edge of the tub, and just as she dipped her foot into the water, wanting to test the temperature of the water, the door suddenly opened, and Yang Fan unexpectedly walked in. Gu Zhuting let out a soft cry and quickly jumped up. Splash! Her whole body was submerged in the water. Her face was as red as a pomegranate as she timidly said, "Ah Lang." Yang Fan laughed like a big bad wolf who had stolen a chicken. "Ah, I suddenly remembered that I have never taken a bath before. Why don't we take a bath together?" Although Gu Zhuting had already shared a bed with him, she had never bathed with him. For a moment, she was so shy that even the roots of her ears turned red. She did not dare to speak, nor did she dare to look at Yang Fan undressing. She only sat in the water with her eyes closed. From head to toe, she was as red as a cooked shrimp. She heard the rustling of clothes, followed by the sound of water splashing. Her heart couldn't help but beat faster. The sound of water splashing was incessant, teasing her heart to the point of rippling. She was about to open her eyes to see what Ah Lang was doing when she suddenly felt a strong hand holding her shoulder. Because of the buoyancy in the water, Gu Zhuting floated over to him like a strand of soft water grass until she drifted into his arms. "Ah Lang!" Gu Zhuting snuggled into Yang Fan's arms and rested her head on his shoulder. Since Yang Fan was taking a bath with a beauty, how could he just take a bath? His palm quietly climbed up her jade peaks. Gu Zhuting didn't know what to do. She could only bite her lips and let him bully her. But Lang Jun became even more aggressive. He grabbed one of her hands and quietly put it into the water, slid it to his lower abdomen, and continued to slide it down. Gu Zhuting naturally understood what he meant. Her soft and delicate hand gently touched his King Kong's fury pestle. At first, she shrank back as if she was startled. Then she gently wrapped her hand around it and gently fiddled with it according to his will. Yang Fan leaned against the wall of the tub and closed his eyes in satisfaction. Seeing that he was very comfortable, Gu Zhuting suddenly gave birth to a great courage. Her small hand played with Yang Fan's lower abdomen for a long time. Her originally jerky technique gradually became skillful, teasing Yang Fan to the point that his breathing became a little faster. Finally, he began to counterattack. He opened his arms and embraced that exquisite, curvaceous, white, and tender body into his embrace. Gu Zhuting sat in his embrace, her pair of jade-like arms gently resting on his shoulders. Her starry eyes were half closed, and there was a hint of helplessness and gentleness in her shyness. She was a completely different person from her usual shrewd and capable appearance. Between Yongfan's palms and fingers, the place that he touched was all soft and smooth. Everywhere he looked, there was a pile of jade powder that was glowing. The touch and sight were both extremely ecstatic, and he immediately felt his lust burning. He grabbed a thick towel from the side of the tub and placed it on the edge of the tub. He then lightly pushed her jade back. Gu Zhuting understood and obediently laid down on the snow-white towel. Yongfan lightly stuck to her back. As soon as he touched her smooth and soft buttocks, he couldn't wait to explore the deep stream. The sound of the water splashing could be heard as the waves surged. Endless waves were set off in the middle of the bath. When the waves surged to a high point, they hit Gu Zhuting's perfect and smooth back. When the tide flowed down, it rippled under her moon-like buttocks that were suspended in the air. Following her lover's wave after wave, Gu Zhuting's heart also rose and fell in the waves of lust. She let out a moan that sounded like she was crying. She respectfully and tenaciously raised her beautiful buttocks, welcoming Yongfan's increasingly intense thrusts. Her slightly raised red lips were like a delicate and pitiful rose. Seeing that her body was becoming more and more fragile, her slender waist involuntarily swayed and straightened. Yongfan only felt that the buttocks under him were smooth and round, plump and firm. The extreme pleasure made his lust rise continuously. The bright light shone on the female body under him. The beautiful body that was lying on the edge of the tub was half submerged in the water and half exposed. It was like a beautiful snake climbing on the edge of the tub, waiting for the great sorcerer to subdue the demon. The beautiful snake gradually couldn't stand the great sorcerer Yang's divine power. Her body went limp. Just as her body went limp, she was scooped up from the water by Yongfan. The sound of slapping was as rapid as the rain. Gu Zhuting felt that it was difficult to breathe, but she liked it this way. She liked to be ravaged by him. She liked to be played by him. She liked to be conquered by him. Suddenly, the beautiful snake seemed to have been hit where it hurt. Her slender jade neck suddenly swung. With a soul-stirring cry of despair, her whole body went limp and she could no longer move. The petals on the surface of the water gently undulated, and the waves in the bathtub gradually calmed down. However, the waves in Gu Zhuting's heart had not completely calmed down. She rested her flushed cheeks on Yongfan's shoulder, and Yongfan could hear her heart beating twice as fast as usual. Yongfan patted her buttocks twice and chuckled. He knew that this time she was really tortured. Almost half an hour was spent in the most violent storm. Even a beautiful and mature woman like Princess Taiping could not bear it, let alone a woman like her who had just become a married woman. Yongfan held her in his arms and loved her tenderly. Following his gentle caress and the warmth of the water, Gu Zhuting gradually recovered her strength. She faintly sighed and looked at her lover with her somewhat dazed eyes. She said in a low voice, "I'm really going to die because of you." Yongfan smiled mischievously. "You're not dead yet. It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. Practice hard, and you'll come back for revenge next time." Gu Zhuting blushed and gently bit his chest. Yongfan smiled and hugged her delicate body. He whispered, "Go back and investigate Du Wentian. There may be an affair between him and Enlu. Maybe we can use this matter to our advantage." "Okay," Gu Zhuting meekly agreed. But the time it took for her to answer was 2 beats slower than usual. She gasped a few more times and gently raised her body. Her breasts were half submerged in the water like a pair of jade melons. Her breathing was much more comfortable when she was slightly out of the water. "Ah Lang, she really has a trick up her sleeve?" "Yes." I tried to dispel her idea, but she refused. Her action of avenging her brother and sister made me look at her in a new light. But she will implicate so I can't just sit back and watch. And Lu has always done things without considering the consequences. I have to be careful when dealing with her. I have braved many storms and waves, so I can't fail miserably and fall into the hands of a little loach like her. Ah Lang won't lose. Gu Zhuting gently wrapped her soft and boneless arms around Yang Fan's neck. She stuck out her thin tongue and coquettishly licked his chest. She said in a sweet voice, "When I roamed Jianghu, I was called a she-devil. But now, Ah Lang has taught me a lesson. How can that little seductress be Ah Lang's opponent?" Yang Fan was surprised and delighted. Gu Zhuting had flattered him many times. But when did she learn to tease him? This pun and this flirtatious licking made Yang Fan's little Yang Fan eager to have a go. "Ah Lang, please spare my life. I don't want it any more." Along with the sweet begging, wind and rain started to blow in the bathroom again. Chapter 1034. Two green oxen pulled an oil-walled carriage and slowly stopped in front of the fragrant forest gate of the forbidden imperial garden. The eunuch of the eastern prison of the Forbidden Garden was standing guard at the gate. He stepped forward to verify the identity of the person in the carriage and waved his hand at the imperial guard at the gate. The gate opened soundlessly, and the carriage, pulled by the two green oxen, slowly drove in. Once inside the gate, it was another world. The garden was full of flowers and trees, the pavilions and terraces were hidden among the green trees, and the small bridges and flowing water were uneven on the grassy plains. It was like a paradise on earth. The gates of the Forbidden Garden silently closed behind them. One of the imperial soldiers guarding the gates looked at the two deep marks on the ground and asked in bewilderment, "It's just a light carriage with oil walls. How can it be so heavy? What's inside?" The other imperial guard looked at the ground and hugged his halberd. He said lazily, "It's probably because it rained last night and the grass is muddy. How can it be? The carriages just now didn't go in so deep." The other imperial guard said, "Who knows? I saw just now that there was only one person sitting in the carriage. He seemed to be a loyal general of 1,000 riders. There's nothing else. Could it be that the carriage is made of iron? Do you have nothing better to do than worry about it?" The two imperial guards returned to the gate and stood still again. In the distance, a few more carriages drove in their direction. The three gardens of Chang, and consisted of the western inner garden, the eastern inner garden, and the Forbidden Garden. The Daxing Garden was located in the Forbidden Garden. The Forbidden Garden was located outside the capital city. It was 27 li from east to west and 23 li from north to south, covering an area of 120 li. It was bordered by the Chan River to the east, Chang, and to the west, the imperial city to the south, and the Wei River to the north. It was the largest of the three great gardens. Since the garden was so large, the invited guests naturally couldn't get off the carriage outside the Forbidden Garden. There was still a long way to go. Yang Fan came from the 1,000 Horsemen camp, so he didn't have to walk a long distance. Before long, he saw more than 20 servants and family warriors protecting a light carriage wandering on the grassy plains. The banner on the front of the carriage had the 3 words Feng Qin Zhang written on it. Yang Fan smiled and ordered, "Speed up and catch up." After Zhang Changzong's carriage entered the Forbidden Garden, he enjoyed the scenery along the way and didn't move very fast. As soon as Yang Fan's carriage approached, Zhang Changzong saw his official banner and immediately ordered people to stop the carriage and wait for him. When the two of them saw each other, they laughed heartily. Zhang Changzong raised his hand to invite Yang Fan out of his carriage and into Zhang Changzong's. Zhang Changzong's carriage had a single shaft and 2 yokes, with long wheels and a large oval-shaped oil paper cover. It looked like a carriage from the Warring States period or the early Qin period, and it looked quite ancient. Because there were no carriages blocking the view, it was suitable for walking around, and one could enjoy the beautiful scenery in all directions at any time. Zhang Changzong asked with a smile. General Yang was also invited to the banquet? Prince Gaoyang had invited a lot of people to this banquet. Relatives of the emperor, officials with meritorious deeds, influential officials from the 2 capitals, officials and gentry, civil and military officials are all here. I heard that even the top-ranked eunuchs in the palace have been invited. Haha, it really is all-inclusive. Yang Fan could hear the mockery in his words and replied with a smile. This kind of thing can only be done by Prince Gaoyang and his wife. The two of them are the members of the imperial family, meritorious officials, relatives of the imperial family, and influential officials. If someone else were to do this, it would be unbefitting of their status and would easily attract gossip. Secondly, others might not necessarily buy it. Zhang Changzong curled his lips, his expression full of disdain. Yang Fan's eyes flashed, and he said, "As far as I know, Shangguan Daiji was also invited by Princess Anil." Zhang Changzong said with a smile, "I'm afraid Shangguan Daiji won't be able to come." Yang Fan said with a smile, "Exactly, he will definitely decline. Unfortunately, Princess Anil doesn't know the real reason, and I'm afraid she will blame Shangguan Daiji." Zhang Changzong said in a carefree manner, "What does Anil count as? 99% of the guests who came today are here to give face to Liang Wanggu Sansi. Do you really think that so many people care about her? If I wasn't so bored that I wanted to come to the Forbidden Garden to relax, I wouldn't even bother to go to her appointment today." Yang Fan smiled and said, "Oh yes, recently there are some strange rumors in the streets. Has Lu Lang heard of them?" Zhang Changzong said, "What's there to inquire about rumors in the streets?" "Huh." From Erling's tone, "Could it be that this rumor has something to do with me?" Yang Fan said, "Correct. This rumor has something to do with Lu Lang. There is a rumor in the streets that Shangguan Daiji is pregnant. In order to prevent this matter from being exposed, she found an opportunity to hide in Chang'an." Zhang Changzong was shocked and cried out involuntarily, "How is that possible? Shangguan Daiji has always been living on the island in the middle of the lake, and basically doesn't have any contact with outsiders. How can others know that she is pregnant?" Yang Fan shook his head and said, "I am also puzzled by this. However, what is even more strange is that the rumors in the streets say that the man who made Shangguan Daiji pregnant is Yu Luling." Zhang Changzong was so scared that he almost jumped up. His face and neck were red as he said, "Nonsense. Who is this person who dares to slander me like this? If I catch that bastard who is gossiping, I will cut him into 1,000 pieces, file his bones and scatter his ashes to appease the hatred in my heart." With a strange expression, Yang Fan said, "Lu Lang, why do you have to be so angry? That man can't really be you?" Zhang Changzong was anxious and angry, and his face turned purple. "Of course it's not me. You know why I am involved in this matter, Erlang. Why are you saying such things?" Yang Fan laughed dryly and said, "I didn't believe it at first. But speaking of Shangguan Daiji's character and talent, only a young talent like you, Lu Lang, would be able to catch her eye. So after hearing the rumors in the streets, I won't hide it from you. Even I am a little confused." Zhang Changzong anxiously said, "You can't say such things. Erlang, this matter really has nothing to do with me. I have always been doted on by the sage. How would I dare to cross the line in matters between men and women? Think about it. If I really had an affair with Shangguan Daiji, would the sage let her go? Would she let me go? Would she let me settle Shangguan Daiji?" Yang Fan nodded and said, "Liu Long's words are reasonable. It's just that the common people don't have such brains and only know how to echo what others say. That's why they spread such rumors. Lu Lang, don't take it to heart. The rumors in the streets won't reach the sage's ears. Moreover, the sage has always doted on Lu Lang. Although there's a saying in ancient times that 3 people will make a tiger and the public's mouth will shine gold, I don't think it will happen to Lu Lang." It was fine if Yang Fan didn't comfort him, but once he did, Zhang Changzong felt even more scared. His pale face no longer had any color. His Majesty may not believe other things, but this kind of thing is simply worse. Once His Majesty hears about it, it's really strange. How did the news of Shangguan Daiji's pregnancy get leaked? Why is it said that it's me? Zhang Changzong's body shook, and he suddenly said, "No, someone must be trying to harm me." Yang Fan disapprovingly said, "It can't be. Lulang has always been kind to people who would want to harm you." Zhang Changzong said, "There are many people who want to harm me. The Wu family, the Li family, and those who pretend to be loyal officials think that I, Zhang, have brought chaos to the court and deceived the emperor. They want to get rid of me quickly." Yang Fan shook his head and said, "Who doesn't know that Lulang is the sage's most favored official? Would they dare to do something like an ant trying to shake a tree?" Zhang Changzong said, "If they want to harm me, it's naturally not that easy. That's why they made such a big fuss about it. The sage dotes on me, so if they want to harm me, they can only make the sage hate me first." The more Zhang Changzong analyzed, the more he felt that his speculation was correct. Yang Fan secretly laughed in his heart. "The emperor ordered you to take care of one. If you fail in your duty, it's just a small matter. Now that this matter has implicated you, I'm afraid that you won't do your best." His face suddenly changed color, and he said, "It's not impossible. I originally thought it was an absurd rumor, but I didn't expect that there's a hidden killing intent behind the rumor." Zhang Changzong gritted his teeth and said, "Who wants to harm me? Who wants to harm me?" Yang Fan murmured in confusion, "Yes, once Shangguan Weiji arrived in Chang, and she was sent to the island in the middle of the lake and had no contact with outsiders. I definitely didn't leak any information, and I can guarantee for my people. But this information, I remember we've traveled to Fanchuan and Xingjiao Temple. Could it be that someone recognized Shangguan Weiji?" Zhang Changzong said resolutely, "Impossible. Shangguan Weiji has lived in the palace since she was young. Even in Luoyang, there aren't many people who can recognize her, not to mention this is Chang. I understand now. It must be someone in Luoyang who heard the secret and wants to use this matter to harm me." Yang Fan said, "Those who are innocent are innocent. Lulang, don't make wild guesses and mess up your position. Leave this matter to me. I'll definitely help you find out the truth." Zhang Changzong couldn't stand being provoked. At this moment, he was so angry that he couldn't wait to go back and investigate this matter. Yang Fan's repeated persuasion finally calmed him down. The vegetation in front of them gradually thinned, and a flat lake gradually appeared. The lake rippled like the sea, and there was a towering palace by the water. The palace group blended perfectly with the mountains, vegetation, and river. The feng shui and qi meridians were all intertwined as if they were made by nature. This was the Forbidden Garden of the royal family, just like the Dragon Gate Hot Spring in Luoyang. Although the royal family had moved to Luoyang a long time ago, this place was not renovated year after year, like when the emperor lived in Chang. It still looked luxurious and magnificent. Many carriages had already stopped in front of the palace. The guests who arrived earlier were either wandering around the willows by the pond in twos or threes, or chatting in the hall. As soon as Zhang Changzong's carriage arrived, someone reported his arrival. As the host, Wu Chongxuan, and his wife had to go forward to welcome him. Those guests who were wary of the two Zhang clan's forces also had to come forward to flatter and curry favor. As Princess Anil walked slowly, she whispered to Du Wentian, who was half a step behind her, "Shangguan Wan won't be coming. Everything will go according to plan." Du Wentian whispered, "I understand." Although today's banquet was hosted by Wu Chongxuan and his wife, the chefs and servants, the musicians and dancers, the food and wine, and the utensils were all provided by the Du family. Therefore, this Du Wentian was able to follow Princess Anli's every step and become the chief steward of the Princess Fu. This banquet in the Forbidden Garden was actually a large-scale outdoor gathering that included picnics, hiking, hunting, horseback riding, kuju, mountaineering, and all kinds of recreational activities. That was why Princess Anil wasn't wearing a palace dress, but a narrow-sleeved shirt with a small lapel. The shirt was knee-length, and she wore striped pants with a leather belt around her waist. It was similar to a Hu costume, extremely enchanting and adding a bit of heroic spirit, making her look especially charming. Yang Fan sat in the carriage and saw Du Wentian following closely behind Princess Anil. A meaningful smile suddenly flashed across the corner of his lips. He whispered to Zhang Changzong, "Lulang, look at the man behind Princess Anil. Doesn't he look familiar?" Although Zhang Changzong was arrogant, he wouldn't sit in the carriage and wait for everyone to come over. He was about to get off the carriage when he heard Yang Fan's words. He quickly looked over and saw Du Wentian. He couldn't help but feel slightly puzzled. That's right. He does look familiar. Who is he? Yang Fan said uncertainly. Why does he look like that lecher we taught a lesson at Xingjiao Temple? Really? Zhang Changzong stared at it for a while more, then slapped the armrest and said, Yes, that's him. After Zhang Changzong said this, he suddenly thought of something. He jumped up and gritted his teeth, saying, I understand. So it's him. Chapter 1035. Before Yang Fan could hold him back, Zhang Changzong had already jumped off the carriage. In truth, Yang Fan did not really want to stop him, and Lu wanted to take revenge for her brother and sister. Yang Fan did not care, but she could not harm his family. Li Guer used Wanner and the child's lives as a weapon, so he could only stand on Zhang Changzong's side. Now that Li Guer was sharpening her knife, he could not just passively deal with her. He instigated Zhang Changzong to come forward to disrupt the other's rhythm and find out the other's trump card. But Wanner was really pregnant, and this was his biggest weakness. He was also afraid that Du Wentian would really speak nonsense, so he immediately followed. In truth, no matter how bold Du Wentian was, he would not dare to speak of this matter in front of Zhang Changzong. But not everyone acted according to reason. Some of the aristocratic families had been spoiled rotten. Their personalities were unreasonable and arrogant. Squatting in the well of the aristocratic families, they did not know the vastness of the world. He had to guard against them. Wu Chongxuan and Princess and Lu saw Zhang Changzong walk quickly towards them and couldn't help but smile. To be treated so courteously by Zhang Changzong, it was also because of their face, but their smiles quickly froze on their faces. They could see that something was wrong. Zhang Changzong's face was green, and his eyes were filled with anger. He was not looking at them at all. Zhang, Feng Qin! Wu Chongxuan stopped and hesitantly raised his hands toward Zhang Changzong. But Zhang Changzong ignored him and walked straight past him. With a swing of his arm, he slapped Du Wentian's face heavily. Du Wentian saw Zhang Changzong rushing over angrily and knew something was wrong. He thought that Zhang Changzong would reason with him, but he did not think that Zhang Changzong would immediately attack. He had forgotten that in front of people whose family background and connections were not as strong as his Du family, he had always been arrogant because he had confidence. Now that Zhang Changzong dared to do this in front of so many relatives of the emperor, ministers, and nobles, it was also because he had confidence. Du Wentian's nose had just healed and was slapped by Zhang Changzong. The pain was unbearable. Tears and nosebleed flowed down together. Zhang Changzong was like an enraged rooster. He didn't say a word. He clenched his teeth and ruthlessly punched Du Wentian's chin, causing Du Wentian to fall face up and heavily fall to the ground. Du Wentian curled up on the ground and covered his head with his hands to resist Zhang Changzong's punches and kicks. He shouted, "What right do you have to hit me? If you don't stop, I'm going to retaliate." The servants and servants present today were all brought by the Du family. When they saw their young master being beaten, they all rushed forward. The dozen or so people that Zhang Changzong brought immediately spread out and protected Zhang Changzong in the middle. Their swords and sabers were unsheathed, and they shouted, "Whoever dares to come forward, kill without mercy." These people were all experts of the imperial palace. They turned a blind eye to Zhang Changzong beating up others, but they wouldn't allow anyone to harm Zhang Changzong. Not only did they protect Zhang Changzong in the middle, there were also 2 imperial guards facing the inside. They looked eager to fight. If Du Wentian dared to retaliate, they would stand up for Zhang Changzong. Today, Wu Chongxuan was hosting this banquet, and the Du family's patriarch, Du Jingting, was also present. Seeing Zhang Changzong beating up his son without saying a word, Du Jingting was both shocked and angry. He rushed forward and said, "Zhang Fengqin, my Du family respects you as an honored guest. Why did you beat up my son?" Zhang Changzong was panting from exhaustion after beating up Du Jingting. He pointed at Du Jingting's nose and said, "You old man are his father? This Zhang will teach your blind son a lesson on your behalf. What are you going to do about it?" Du Jingting was of noble status. When had he ever suffered such humiliation? His face turned green and his body trembled. Wu Chongxuan rushed forward and grabbed Zhang Changzong's arm. He said, "Zhang Fengqin, please calm down. I don't know how young Master Du has offended you. I'll ask him to apologize to you. Please don't hurt our friendship." Zhang Changzong said angrily, "What friendship does this Zhang have with him? Ask him yourself if he deserves to be beaten." Yang Fan rushed over at the right time and said with a surprised expression, "Why is sixth brother so angry? Does this friend have a grudge against you? Ah, he looks so familiar. Sixth brother, this person seems to be the lecher we met at Qingjiao Temple." Du Jingting was stunned and asked in a panic, "What lecher?" Yang Fan said, "This Yang once visited Qingjiao Temple with Zhang Fengqin. We saw a lecher molesting a woman in the temple. Zhang Fengqin acted righteously and taught him a lesson. May I know who this old gentleman is? Is this lecher your son?" Du Jingting knew Yang Fan's real identity. How could he not believe him when he heard him say this? He turned to Du Wentian in shock and anger and shouted, "Evil creature, is this true?" Du Wentian hurriedly defended himself. "Father, don't listen to their nonsense. They clearly—" Yang Fan suddenly shouted and interrupted him. "Do you dare to say that you never molested a woman at Qingjiao Temple?" Du Wentian's voice choked. He had indeed been beaten because he had molested a woman. Later on, all kinds of grievances had arisen because of this. But how could he admit it now? He wanted to refute, but Yang Fan's shout had exposed his scandal. His tone paused and his expression changed. The surrounding guests had all seen the world. Just by looking at his guilty expression, they knew that Yang Fan was telling the truth. They couldn't help whispering to each other and revealing looks of disdain. Du Jingting had never thought that his son, who had always been well-behaved in front of him, would do such a shameful thing outside. He angrily scolded, "You unfilial son, you've really disgraced our Du family." Du Jingting rushed towards Du Wentian as he spoke, but was pulled back by Yang Fan. Yang Fan stretched out his hand and pinched Du Wentian's numb tendon with his thumb. Du Wentian felt half of his body go numb. He couldn't help but let out a muffled groan and swallow back the words that were on the tip of his tongue. Yang Fan said in a low voice, "If you dare to speak nonsense in public, Zhang Fengqin will dare to kill you in public." Du Wentian felt a chill in his heart when he saw the shining swords in the hands of the imperial bodyguards. He didn't have the courage to shout out the truth in public. Yang Fan's words were swift and quick. Moreover, he had used the opportunity of bending down to support Du Wentian to whisper in his ear, so no one else noticed. Yang Fan helped Du Wentian up and said to Zhang Changzong in a clear voice, "Sixth Lang, today is Prince Consort Wu's day to entertain guests. You should at least give Prince Consort Wu some face. Let's forget about this matter." Just now, Zhang Changzong was also angry. That was why he attacked without considering the consequences. At this time, seeing Yang Fan secretly giving him a meaningful glance, he suddenly came to his senses. He was also afraid that Du Wentian would be forced into a corner and embarrass him in front of everyone. So he heavily snorted and didn't say anything. Yang Fan laughed and said to Du Jingting, "The matter that day was because your son was young and suddenly lost his head when he saw the woman he liked. It's just that Zhang Fengqin has always been righteous, so he got into a conflict with your son when he interfered. That's why he wasn't able to suppress his anger today. Since everyone is familiar with each other, let's not look into this matter in detail. He had just said that Du Wentian was a lecher who had molested an innocent woman in Xingjia Temple. But now he was saying that Du Wentian had only lost his head. His explanation was completely insincere. Not only was Du Wentian confused, but even Du Jingting didn't know how to respond. Li Guo secretly sneered. Do you think that using Zhang Changzong to threaten him will work? That rumor has long been spread out. Just wait for me to force Shangguan to show up and let all the guests see her with their own eyes. At that time, whether you are innocent or not, you won't be able to defend yourself. Until now, Li Guo still thought that the man who had made Shanghai pregnant in the rumor Du Wentian had spread was Yang Fan. She was afraid that Du Wentian wouldn't be able to control himself and ruin her plans, so she threw a meaningful glance at Du Wentian to smooth things over. Everyone, give this consort some face and don't mention this matter again. Du Wentian was even more obedient to Li Guo than his own father. When he saw Li Guo's meaningful glance, he could only swallow his anger. Seeing this, Du Jingting was even more certain that his son had molested an innocent woman. Although it wasn't a serious crime, it was still a disgrace to the family and would make it seem like he wasn't strict enough with his son. Du Jingting was filled with shame, but he couldn't discipline his son in public. He could only glare at him and scold, "You little beast, for the sake of the princess and the prince consort, I'll let you off for now. When we return to the residence, this old man will properly settle the score with you." Wu Chongxuan hurriedly grabbed Zhang Changzong's arm and introduced him to the guests. No one wanted to embarrass Du Jingting too much, so they all pretended not to know about the matter and greeted Zhang Changzong loudly. Then, like the stars surrounding the moon, they led Zhang Changzong to the main hall. Du Wentian looked at Zhang Changzong's receding figure and spat out a mouthful of bloody spittle. The loyal servant Qinjia quickly offered him a handkerchief. Du Wentian wiped the blood from his nose, the hatred in his heart growing. When Li Guo had asked him to do that, he had been somewhat hesitant, but now he no longer had any scruples. The banquet began in the main hall. Everyone talked cheerfully and wittily, deliberately avoiding the matter just now. However, it could be imagined that the news of Fan Chuan's son molesting a woman and being beaten up by Zhang Changzong would definitely spread throughout Chang. And after the banquet, Du Jingting's face was dark. He only sat for a moment before saying that he wasn't feeling well and bidding farewell to the princess and the prince consort. Wu Chongxuan knew that he wasn't feeling well, so he didn't urge him to stay. Du Jingting left the main hall. He had wanted to find his son to teach him another lesson, but when he asked a few servants, no one knew where he had gone. Du Jingting thought that his son was too ashamed to see anyone else and had already left. He angrily boarded his carriage and left. In a corner of the palace, Chen Jia carried a barrel of oil and walked over with difficulty. She pulled out the cork, then hesitantly turned around and asked, "Young master, do you really want some?" There was a clear palm print on Du Wentian's face as he limped over. He kicked the oil barrel and threw a torch forward fiercely. A raging flame ignited with a pung sound. The fire raged, reflecting his ferocious face. Only then did he grit his teeth and say, "Late." Princess and Lu and Wu Chongxuan were the guests at today's banquet, but neither the Prince of Xiang's 5 sons nor Wu Chongxuan and his wife were here for this banquet. Since Zhang Changzong had arrived, it would be difficult for him not to usurp the host's position. Everyone took turns toasting him. Yang Fan waited for a long time before finally finding an opportunity to walk up to him. Zhang Changzong glanced at him and said, "Sit." Yang Fan folded his feet and sat down next to him. Zhang Changzong raised his wine cup and stared at the 2 groups of dancers dancing in the hall. He whispered, "Why did you stop me just now? Wouldn't it have been over if I had killed him with one strike of my sword? So what if it's the Du clan? I've already killed him, so what can they do to me?" Yang Fan took a sip of wine and smiled at the beautiful leading dancer who was waving her green sleeve at him. He whispered, Does Sixth Lang think that this matter is as simple as young master do harboring a grudge and slandering someone? Zhang Changzong's expression changed. He slowly turned his head and asked, "What do you mean?" Yang Fan replied, "That lecher really has the guts to make Sixth Lang his enemy? Moreover, even if this matter were to spread among the common people, how could it reach the ears of the emperor, who resides deep in the imperial palace? If the emperor doesn't know, what harm can it do to you, Erlang? But does he have the ability to face the emperor?" Zhang Changzong's pupils suddenly constricted as he realized, "You mean he has someone behind him?" Yang Fan didn't say anything and only took another sip of wine. Zhang Changzong's expression changed. He suddenly turned his head to look at Wu Chongxuan, his eyes full of murderous intent. Wu Chongxuan was carefully picking out the fish bones and attentively placing a piece of fish meat on a plate. He didn't notice Zhang Changzong's fierce gaze at all. Zhang Changzong withdrew his gaze and asked in a low voice, "What other conspiracy do you think they have?" Yang Fan said, "I don't know either, so we have to wait." Before he finished speaking, a burst of smoke suddenly rolled in from the back of the hall. There were many layers of curtains in the palace, and most of the buildings were made of wood. In addition, there was oil to fuel the fire and the wind to help it burn, so it burned very quickly. Yang Fan suddenly turned his head and saw the tongue of fire was already in front of him. Chapter 1036. The palace that Princess and Lu used to entertain her guests was called Baiyu Palace. It was the largest palace building in Xingyuan. Not a single nail was used in the entire palace. Everything was built using mortise and tenon joints. This palace had been built since the second year of Rinshou of the Great Sui. It had hosted Emperor Wenyang Jian, Emperor Yangguang, Emperor Gaozu Li Yuan, Emperor Taizong Li Shimin, Emperor Gaozong Li Ji, and countless concubines and even relatives of the emperor. It had always been in perfect condition, but now it had become a blazing volcano. The flames soared and the heat burned their noses and mouths. Everyone could only retreat again and again. The eunuchs and eunuchs of the Changal, Eastern and Western eunuchs, who were in charge of the Forbidden Garden, heard the news and rushed over. They drew water from the jade pool nearby to extinguish the fire, but the palace was made of wood. Once it started to burn, the fire could not be contained. Under the rising flames, no one could stand within 100 feet. A few daring eunuchs tried to force their way closer. Their hair was immediately burnt and curled up. They could not even open their eyes. How could they put out the fire like this? They could only watch as the fire engulfed the entire palace. Zhang Changzong looked at the flames that were as tall as a small mountain. He clapped his hands and praised, "What a big fire! It's a pity that it's not as spectacular as the Ming Tang and Heaven fires in Loyang." Yang Fan looked at him from the corner of his eyes. He thought, "Does this guy think he's setting off fireworks? Such a big and magnificent palace is gone just like that. It's as if he still wants to see more." Yang Fan turned around and looked at the palace that was completely engulfed in flames. He sighed with regret. Suddenly, he felt a pair of eyes staring at him. Yang Fan's eyes flashed as he looked at that pair of eyes. Li Guier hurriedly withdrew her gaze and turned her head away, as if she had never seen him before. However, even though she withdrew her gaze quickly, Yang Fan still caught a glimpse of it. It was an excited and bewitching gaze. Baiyu Palace is on fire. Why is she looking at me? Why is her gaze so strange? Yang Fan frowned slightly. An uneasy feeling rose in his heart. Boom! A huge pillar fell down, sending up countless sparks. The flames first dimmed, then burned even more fiercely. One of the palace walls was on the verge of collapsing and finally collapsed in the fire. The raging flames that came rushing towards them forced them to step back again and again. They had to retreat more than 100 feet before they could regain their balance. The majestic palace had finally been reduced to a pile of rubble. Although the fire was still burning, the blazing flames had already begun to die down. Luo Shanqian, the head steward of the Forbidden Garden, who had rushed over, saw this scene and his legs went soft. He fell to the ground on but his white and plump double chin trembled, as if he was mourning the death of his parents. It's over, it's over. The Aquamarine Palace is finished. How can I, your husband, bear such a great sin? Yang Qingfeng, the head steward of perpetual music, had a dark and pale expression on his face. Like a little ghost that had crawled out of a pit, he moved in front of Luo Shanqian and said miserably, "Eunuch Luo, the Aquamarine Palace is on fire. What should we do now?" Luo Shanqian did not know where he got the strength from. His round and fat body actually crawled up from the ground with a grunt. He stared hard with his puffy eyes and shouted in a shrill voice, "You ask me? Who should I ask? You bastard! How could you cause the Aquamarine Palace to catch fire in broad daylight?" Yang Qingfeng cried out in grievance, "Eunuch Luo, you can't blame me for this. It's true that I am in charge of Daxing Garden, but I can't always be in the Aquamarine Palace." Luo Shanqian gave him a big slap, causing Yang Qingfeng to spin twice on the spot. Luo Shanqian rebuked in a shrill voice, "So you're saying that you're in the right? Why would the Aquamarine Palace catch fire out of nowhere? Was it caused by the dry weather? You have to give me an explanation. Otherwise you, Yang Qingfeng, won't be able to escape responsibility." As Luo Shanqian spoke, he winked at him. His round, white, and clean face was like a large pig's head that had shed its fur. With a slight shake of his neck, his double chin would tremble incessantly. His pair of puffy eyes still had to make a suggestive expression of pursing his lips and knitting his eyebrows. It was truly difficult for him. When Yang Qingfeng saw Luo Shanqian's squinting eyes and crooked mouth, she thought that he had suffered a stroke from the fire in the Aquamarine Palace. She was stunned for a moment before suddenly coming to her senses. She hurriedly shouted, "It just rained here yesterday. How could it be dry? This is clearly the result of the carelessness of the cooks. They lost the fire seed and caused the fire." Luo Shanqian secretly heaved a sigh of relief. This fellow was not too stupid after all. Luo Shanqian ran to Princess Annel's side like a round meatball. He bowed with his hands in front of him and said, "Princess, why would the Aquamarine Palace catch fire out of nowhere? This is clearly the result of the carelessness of the cooks brought by the Du family. If the imperial court investigates this matter, please bear witness for the servant." Princess Annel glared at him with her almond-shaped eyes and reprimanded, "I am having a banquet today. It was supposed to be a joyous occasion, but now it has been ruined by this fire. You eunuchs caused the fire because of your carelessness and nearly cost me my life. Now you still want to push the blame onto others?" Eunuch Luo was wrapped in a tight green robe. His back was already drenched in sweat. Now that he heard that Princess Annel seemed to want to cover up for the Du family's cooks and put the blame on them, he was both anxious and afraid. He sweated profusely. "Your Highness, this Aquamarine Palace has been here for many years. Nothing has ever happened before. Now that there is a fire for no reason, it is naturally the result of the carelessness of the cooks. Your Highness must uphold justice for the servant." Hearing this, Du Wentian was unable to restrain his anger. He stepped forward and said, "According to Eunuch Luo, this fire should be blamed on the cooks. But looking at the source of the fire, it is clearly not under the cooks." Yang Qingfeng said, "There are curtains hanging everywhere in this grand hall. They are all flammable and can be ignited with just a spark. Although the source of the fire is not under the cooks, can it be caused by the scattered fire seed under the cooks? It is daytime now and there are no candles. The only fire seed in the Aquamarine Palace is under the cooks. If it is not under the cooks, who else could it be?" There were also a few steward eunuchs who attended the banquet today. They were more or less friends with Eunuch Luo and Eunuch Yang. Even if they were not friends, they knew that if this matter was placed on Eunuch Luo's head, it would be a great sin. They all worked in the palace and would naturally stand on eunuch Luo's side. Immediately, a few steward eunuchs came forward and helped eunuch Yang argue. Chen Jia mixed in with the group of cooks and said in a low voice, "Did you hear that? These eunuchs want to push the blame onto you. If this crime is confirmed, it is a crime punishable by beheading." When the 20 or so cooks hired from several large restaurants heard Chen Jia say that this group of cowardly eunuchs wanted to push the blame of the fire on them, they couldn't help but be shocked and angry. "This is ridiculous! You are drinking and having fun in the hall while we are smoking and sweating in the kitchen. Now that something has happened, you want to push the blame onto us?" A group of sorrowful and angry cooks immediately rushed to Princess Annel's side and argued with the group of cowardly eunuchs. The burly cooks had a deep voice like a great bell, while the high-pitched eunuch's voice was as clear as a light chime. Both of them argued, and neither gave an inch. The cooks were still wearing aprons. Some of them didn't forget to carry their spatulas when they ran for their lives. In their anger, they also waved their spatulas. It was a spectacular sight. Zhang Changzong stood at the side, taking pleasure in other people's misfortune. The more he watched, the more amused he became. Yang Fan's expression, on the other hand, gradually turned serious. He glanced at Princess Annel, who stood there, watching the two sides argue until their faces were red to the ears. Her lips slightly curled up, forming a seductive arc. Yang Fan narrowed his eyes slightly and waved his hand behind him. Rin Wei immediately walked to his side. Yang Fan whispered a few words into Rin Wei's ear. Rin Wei was startled at first, but then nodded and hurriedly walked out of the crowd, spurring his horse to gallop away. The scene was in a state of chaos, so no one noticed his departure. Seeing that a lawsuit had broken out at the scene of the fire, the guests were somewhat at a loss. The influential figures of the aristocratic families gathered together to discuss. Duguyu represented everyone and came before Wu Chongxuan. Duguyu cupped his hands towards Wu Chongxuan and Princess Annel, saying, Princess son-in-law, we are greatly honored by your warm hospitality today. We didn't expect such an unexpected turn of events. It is truly a pity. Now that things are like this, we cannot stay for long. We will take our leave now. Dear guests, please take your time, and Lu has something to say. Before Wu Chongxuan could nod in agreement, Princess Annel suddenly spoke first. Today's unexpected accident has dampened everyone's mood, and Lu is also very regretful. My imperial grandmother is about to move the capital, but unexpectedly Bio Palace was destroyed in a fire today. Imperial grandmother will definitely not be happy when she hears about it, and Lu also feels anxious when he thinks about it. Speaking of which, the Forbidden Gardens of Chang and Palace are currently under the jurisdiction of the Shangguan system. Now that the eunuch and Kung Ti have their own claims, and Lu is young and inexperienced, so he doesn't know how to handle it. And Lu thinks that this matter should be reported to the Shangguan system, and who is right and who is wrong should be decided by the Shangguan system. But firstly, this matter is of great importance, and Lu is afraid that she won't be able to explain it clearly. Secondly, the host of today's banquet is Lu. So if we think about it carefully, Lu is also responsible, so how can I seek justice for others? Thirdly, the Du family is helping me organize the banquet today. Even if I maintain a fair heart, I will inevitably be criticized for being biased, so I would like to invite everyone to be a witness. Princess Annel spoke with fervor and assurance, her expression alternating between sadness and awkwardness. That delicate and pitiful look made one's heart ache, but what she said was even more reasonable. Today, everyone came to attend the banquet, and hearing that the host was in such a difficult position, how could they say that they wanted to leave? Yang Fan heard half of it and understood Enli's intention, and his lips couldn't help but reveal a trace of a cold smile. Zhang Changzong had been watching the show from the sidelines, but now that he heard that Princess Annel wanted to bring everyone to see Shanghai One, he instantly panicked. Right now, how could Shanghai want to see anyone, Not even a single person, let alone so many people. Once they see Shanghai, this matter can no longer be concealed. Zhang Changzong was anxious and was about to rush out to stop her, but was pulled back by Yang Fan. Zhang Changzong anxiously said, "Why is Second Lang stopping me? Something big is going to happen." Yang Fan said in a low voice, "Everything in Lucette is reasonable. What reason does Sixth Lang have to stop her?" Even if I have no reason, I will still stop her. Shangguan Wan'er cannot see anyone now, so I will not allow her to go. Does she dare to make things difficult for me?" Yang Fan said, "Sixth Lang, do you still not understand why this fire started?" Zhang Changzong was stunned at first, then shocked. Could it be that she burned by Yu Palace to force Shangguan Wan to see her? Yang Fan said, "From the looks of it, I'm afraid so. Sixth Lang, if it was any other time, I also believe that she would not dare to offend you. But now it seems that the mastermind is clearly Enlu. In order to take revenge on you for her brother and sister, she painstakingly did not hesitate to burn down Bayou Palace. Now that the dagger has been revealed, do you think that she will give up this great opportunity to force Shangguan Wan to see her, just because she is worried about angering you?" Zhang Changzong was shocked and angry. Then what should we do? Yang Fan suddenly whispered something into his ear. Zhang Changzong's eyes brightened, and he asked in pleasant surprise, "Is this true?" Yang Fan smiled slightly and said calmly, "Sixth Lang, when have I ever disappointed you when I have worked with you on important matters?" Zhang Changzong laughed, but just as the laughter rushed out of his throat, he hurriedly held it back. Luckily, he held it back in time and only made an explosive sound. This place was so smoky that others would think that he was choking on his throat. Zhang Changzong coughed, lowered his voice, and said excitedly, "Then I will endure for a while, as long as I can get through this. Humph." Chapter 1037. It was the first time that so many dignitaries gathered in Longqing Square, and it was the first time that Longqing Pool was so lively. There were hundreds of nobles attending the banquet today, and there were at least a few thousand attendants and servants. They majestically stepped onto the island in the middle of the lake. A large group of people arrived on the island and arrived in front of Shangguan Wan'er's mansion. Apart from Zhang Changzong and Yang Fan, who were already living on the island, only Princess Enlu and the others stepped forward. She was a member of the imperial family, and the reason why she was able to use the Forbidden Garden for the banquet was also because of her status. Now that something had happened, it was only natural that she would step forward. The three of them stepped forward. Zhang Changzong couldn't hold back and rushed to knock on the door. Princess Anil glanced at Yang Fan and teased, "General Yang, you seem a little nervous." Yang Fan looked steadily at the red lacquer door and lightly said, "What do I have to be nervous about?" Princess Anil's lips curled up with a trace of complacency of her plot succeeding. She sneered and said, "Do you think that Shangguan Daiji can still avoid people today? As long as she comes out, who can hide her big belly from? Under the watchful eyes of the public, this matter will soon spread throughout Chang and city, and then the rumors circulating in the streets will enter the ears of these high-ranking officials and dignitaries. At that time, do you think that my imperial grandmother will investigate the scribes of the CI officials and make this scandal known to everyone in order to protect you? Or will she quickly behead you and Shangguan Wan?" Yang Fan suddenly turned his head to look at her, and his eyes were full of surprise, and surprise that couldn't be concealed. Li Guer saw it in his eyes and thought that it was his shocked and frightened look. She felt even happier and proudly sneered. "Do you think that I let people spread the news that you have an affair with Shangguan Wan'er just to ruin your reputation? If you think so, then you are wrong. Very wrong. I, Li Guer, have never been such a magnanimous person. Since you've offended me, I want you to die. I want you to die without a burial." Yang Fan did not hear the last of her harsh words. His thoughts were abnormally chaotic. What is going on? The rumor said that Wan'er and Zhang Changzong had an affair. Why did she say it was me? Could it be that she did not want to avenge her brother and sister, but deliberately wanted to deal with me? But how could the rumor? Yang Fan suddenly thought of something and turned his head to look. In the crowd, Du Wentian was staring at Zhang Changzong's back with his fingerprints all over his face. His face was filled with a smug sneer. In an instant, Yang Fan understood everything. Zhang Changzong quickly walked down the stairs. Li Gui'er immediately greeted him and said, Zhang Fengqin, what did Shangguan Weiji say? Zhang Changzong had already received a hint from Yang Fan before, but after all, he did not participate in the whole process. He was afraid that things might not be as easy as Yang Fan said, so he was still a little nervous. He first looked at Yang Fan and then said, Shangguan Weiji is at the back of the mountain. What? Li Gui'er was also stunned. A pregnant woman could ride a horse to the bow? Obviously not. Could it be that Du Wentian's information was wrong? But no matter what, she had to see Shangguan Wan with her own eyes. Li Gui'er was startled and immediately said, Okay, then let's go to the back of the mountain. Li Gui'er turned around and quickly walked a few steps with her dress in her hand. She said to the many Chang and officials and nobles who were waiting quietly in front of her, Shangguan Weiji is at the back of the mountain. We will go directly to the back of the mountain to see her. Young Master Du, please come forward. I have something to ask you. Du Wentian hurriedly ran in front of her and bowed. Your Highness. Li Gui'er turned around and walked up the mountain. She asked coldly, Are you sure that the pregnant woman you saw that day was Shangguan Wan? Du Wentian hesitated for a moment and replied, I really don't know what Shangguan Wan looks like. However, the woman who donated the sesame oil money in the name of Zhang Wan was indeed pregnant. Moreover, the other two men who accompanied her under pseudonyms were indeed Yang Fan and Zhang Changzong. From the words and deeds of the three people, the woman's status was definitely not below Zhang Changzong's. Who else could it be other than Shangguan Wan? Li Gui'er was slightly relieved after hearing this. She whispered, When you see Shangguan Wan look carefully for me. See if she is the person you have seen before. Du Wentian was just about to nod in agreement when a hand suddenly stretched out from behind and put on his shoulder. He was violently pulled out. Du Wentian was not prepared and almost fell. Wu Chongxuan squeezed over and whispered to Li Gui'er, And Lu, what are you doing? We had a banquet in the Aquamarine Palace and accidentally caused a big fire. The sage will certainly be unhappy if he hears this. But what should we do now has already been burned. What can we do? Whether the imperial court is investigating the dereliction of duty of the eunuchs, or those hired by the Du family for the fire, you are a dignified princess. Do you need to be the judge? Look, all the bigwigs in Chang, and have been invited to the island in the middle of the lake by you. This is too big a scene. Li Gui'er glared at him and scolded, It's my business. Don't interfere. Yang Fan and Zhang Changzong walked side by side. He asked uneasily, Erlang, can we really deceive everyone this time? Yang Fan said, To tell you the truth, when I was wandering around Chang and city, I happened to see the Jianghu entertainer who was good at illusions performing. That was how I came up with this idea. At that time, I asked someone to learn it just in case. I didn't expect it to really come in handy today. Don't worry. Unless they want to search you, they will never be able to tell the truth. Tell me, do they have the reason and courage to search Shangguan Du? Zhang Changzong sighed quietly and said, That's for the best. The so-called mountain on the island was just a high slope. After climbing over the slope, there was a stretch of green grass like a green carpet, all the way to the dense forest at the foot of the mountain. Although the slope was relatively gentle, it was the flattest near the forest, so the horse racing field was set up there. 7 or 8 women wearing scarves, boots, and sticks in their hands were riding tall horses. They were fighting on the field, and the battle seemed to be very fierce. A woman riding a date red horse was galloping. Suddenly, she bent down and nimbly picked up the ground with her stick. She turned sideways and threw a ball backward. The red ball slid in an arc and flew 7 or 8 feet away. It bounced and rolled on the ground. Several women who had just managed to get there immediately scrambled to get it. As soon as Ligua climbed over the hill, she saw the crowd and immediately looked for Shengguanwan. When she saw the beautiful woman on the maroon horse, she immediately stopped in her tracks and stood there in a daze. The moment she stopped, the thousands of people following behind her immediately stopped as well. Although they were still far away, the woman riding on the purplish-red horse was clearly Shengguanwan. Her clothes fluttered in the wind as she urged the horse to gallop. Looking at her strong and agile figure, as well as her slender waist, who would dare to say that she was pregnant? Li Guerre suddenly turned her head to look at Du Wentian. Du Wentian was also a little confused. The woman who was bowing on the horse did look very much like the big-bellied woman he saw the other day, although they were standing on the slope and were still far from the horse racing field, so they could not see the features clearly, but there were 7 or 8 people on the field. Other than this woman, there was no one else who looked like the woman he saw the other day. At this time, Li Guerre had no time to confirm with him. Since things had come to this, whether what Du Wentian said was true or false, she had to continue the show. Li Guerre took a deep breath and walked down the slope. As she walked, she secretly rejoiced in her heart. Luckily, I found an excuse first and left a way out. I did not publicly shed all pretense of cordiality with her. Otherwise, I'm afraid today's matter would be difficult. Under the fighting of the women, the red ball was suddenly hit in front of Shengguanwan. Shengguanwan waved her staff and urged her horse to snatch it. Just as she was about to rush in front of the ball, she suddenly saw a large group of people coming from the slope. She seemed to be startled and subconsciously pulled the reins. But the women who were rushing over to snatch the ball did not have time to stop. The horses they were riding heavily collided with Shengguanwan as horse. There was the sound of the war horse neighing, and Shengguanwan fell from her horse. She rolled a few times and fell into the bushes at the edge of the forest. The bowing women hurriedly jumped down from their horses and rushed forward. Li Guerre looked down from above and could see clearly that although that Shengguanwan fell from her horse and rolled a few times until she fell into the knee-high bushes at the edge of the forest, she could still see her. From the beginning to the end, Shengguanwan had never left her line of sight. Several bowing women hurriedly helped Shengguanwan up. Shengguanwan did not know if she sprained her ankle or twisted her waist. She put one hand on her waist, bent her body, limped forward 2 steps, and then waved her hand to stop. Immediately, someone raised her voice and shouted. A driver came from the side of the field and drove a green oil purifying cart. The women helped her into the cart. When Li Guerre hurriedly rushed over with her people, Shengguanwan was already sitting in the carriage. It was summer. The curtains of the carriage were rolled up high. The inside of the carriage was transparent, and she could see everything clearly. Just now, the person who rode the bowing horse was indeed her. The person who fell from the horse and was helped into the carriage was also her. Her appearance, there was no mistake about it. It was indeed Shengguanwan. Shengguanwan seemed to be in some pain. She had one hand on her waist and the other on the armrest by the window. Her eyebrows were slightly furrowed, as if she did not understand why Li Guerre brought so many people to the island. Princess Annel, Prince Consort Wu, Zhang Fengqin, Prince Shouchuan, Prince Hingyang, you brothers have also come. Wanner greeted them. Wanner just fell down and my internal breathing is interrupted. I cannot get off the carriage to meet you. Please forgive Wanner for being rude. Zhang Changzong and Wu Chongxuan quickly cupped their hands and said that there was no harm in being straightforward. Li Qingqi and his brother's attitude towards Shengguanwan was even more respectful. They cupped their hands and bowed deeply to her. Their etiquette was very considerate. Shengguanwan looked at the people standing behind them in confusion. When she saw the eunuchs and eunuchs wearing an apron and carrying a spatula, her eyes were especially surprised. But with her status, she naturally would not ask people about the origin of these people out of curiosity. Wu Chongxuan did not know the real reason why the Duke of Anil insisted on seeing Shanghai Wanner. He laughed at Shanghai Wanner and said, "Shengguan Daiji, today we husband and wife are holding a banquet with many guests. You are our most important guest. Didn't Daiji say that you are suffering from a minor illness and cannot come? Why are you here playing bowing and playing basketball, looking so valiant and heroic?" Shanghai Wanner smiled bitterly and said, "Prince Consort Wu, you are wrong. Isn't Wanner suffering from a minor illness right now?" Wu Chongxuan could not help but laugh when he heard this. Shanghai Wanner joked with him for a while before her expression turned serious, and she said, "Wanner likes peace and quiet. It is really not suitable for such a noisy scene. If it is to recite poems and compose songs, or form a club to have fun, Wanner will gladly go. But when I heard that it is a grand banquet, I will avoid it like the plague. Moreover, Wanner is an internal official after all. There are many inconveniences. I hope Prince Consort Wu can understand." Wu Chongxuan smiled and said, "Shangguan Daiji is too polite. How can I blame you? Is Daiji's injury serious? Do you want a doctor to come and take a look?" Shanghai Wanner smiled faintly and said, "There is no need. It is just a sprained waist. When I go back, I will apply some blood circulation ointment and let Xiao Miao massage me." Xiao Miao's massage is learned from the Imperial Physician's Bureau's Liang de Gua. Her techniques are exquisite and not below the 4 great masseurs of the Imperial Physician's Bureau. Even the saints like to let her massage them to help them sleep. While the two of them were chatting, Li Gui'er stood at the side and did not say a word. She tried hard to find something suspicious. But from Wanner, she really could not find a single flaw. Not only did she look exactly the same as Shanghai Wanner, even her voice was the same. At this moment, she was sitting on the couch. Because she was wearing a Hu-style riding outfit, her fit and graceful figure could be seen clearly. That small waist was slender and did not look like a pregnant woman at all. And Lu also had an oil cleaning cart like this, so she was very clear about the structure of the cart. This kind of oil cleaning cart used in the summer had a thin layer of wood on both sides and the back. Even the couch that Shanghai Wanner was sitting on was not a box type, but a hollow wooden plank. There was no place for a person to hide. Of course. And Li's focus was on Shangguan Wanner. She didn't pay much attention to the car because she had never thought of replacing Shangguan Wanner with someone who looked exactly like her. How could it be so easy? Shanghai Wanner and Wu Chongxuan exchanged a few pleasantries and took the initiative to return to the main topic. Princess and Prince Consort are not at Dexing Yuan feasting with the guests, but have come to this island in the middle of the lake with great fanfare. Li Gui'er glared fiercely at the dumbfounded Du Wentian and braced herself to go forward and say, "Wai Ji, I have set up a banquet in Dexing Yuan's Bayou Palace to entertain the guests." Who would have thought that extreme joy would turn to sorrow? Bayou Palace suddenly caught fire and was not able to be saved in time. Now the entire Bayou Palace is destroyed. What? Shanghai Wanner was shocked. Li Gui'er saw it clearly. In her shock, Shanghai Wanner unconsciously wanted to stand up. But when she lifted her buttocks, it affected her waist injury. Only then did she let out an ouch and sat back down. She nervously said, "Princess said that Bayou Palace has been destroyed? The entire Bayou Palace has been destroyed?" Seeing this, Li Gui'er knew that there was absolutely no problem with Shanghai Wanner. In her heart, she was really angry and hated Du Wentian. She could only reluctantly answer, "Yes. Right now, the Forbidden Garden's supervisors and the hired pit demons each have their own version of events. The garden supervisor says that it was because a fire seed was scattered under the stove that caused the disaster. The pit demons say that it was because the eunuchs did not take good care of it and accidentally burned the palace. This matter is of great importance. And Lu does not dare to be arbitrary and can only come to seek an audience with Shangguan Weiji. Right now, All the places in the palace are being managed by Shangguan Weiji. I hope that Weiji can judge this case." Shanghai Wanner sighed and said, "The fire in Baiyu Palace is something that no one wishes to see. Now that the palace has been burnt down, Princess should not think too much about it. Wanner will report this matter to the saint. The saint has always been merciful and will definitely deal with this lightly. However, the cause of the fire still needs to be investigated clearly, and the responsibility for this. Wanner has sprained her waist, and it is not suitable for her to rush to the scene of the fire. Moreover, Wanner is not good at this kind of thing. As far as I know, the Forbidden Garden's supervisors are under the jurisdiction of the Sinong Temple, right?" The Forbidden Garden's supervisor, Luo Shanqian, hurriedly stepped forward and said, "Yes, the Forbidden Garden's supervisors are under the jurisdiction of the Sinong Temple." Shanghai Wanna nodded and said, "Good. Then let the Sinong Temple come forward to investigate the scene of the fire and investigate the cause of the fire. Since this matter also involves the hired pit demons in order to seek justice. Is there anyone from the Ministry of Justice and the Luoyang government here?" Qin Dong and Lu Cheqian immediately stepped forward and cupped their hands in greeting. "Greetings to Shangguan Weiji." Shanghai Wanna nodded and said, "I thank the Ministry of Justice, the Luoyang government, and the Sinong Temple for working together to investigate the scene of the fire, investigate the cause of the fire, and clarify the responsibility." The two of them hurriedly agreed. Du Wentian stood in the crowd, almost unable to believe his eyes. He recognized Wanner sitting in the carriage. She was indeed the woman he saw at the Sinong Temple that day. But why was her stomach gone? Du Wentian paced back and forth, getting closer and closer, wanting to take a closer look. Yang Fan had been staring at him. At this moment, he secretly gave Xu Xiaomao, who was dressed in riding attire, a look. Xu Xiaomao suddenly jumped out and pretended to be suddenly enlightened. "Eh? Isn't this the lecher who dared to take liberties with me at Xingjiao Temple?" Du Wentian was shocked. He did not think that the other would dare to expose this matter. Before he could react, Xu Xiaomao had already said angrily, "That day you ran away quickly. Let's see where you can run to today. Sisters, beat him up." Lan, Yiqing, Gaoing, and the other women raised their staffs in their hands and hit him in the face. Du Wentian still wanted to explain, but the women did not give him the chance. This round of beating caused Du Wentian's head to bleed. He covered his head and fled like a rat. The women did not let him go and chased him all the way. Only then did the onlookers understand why Zhang Changzong would fight Du Wentian when he saw him at Daxing Garden. At first, they were wondering why he was so chivalrous. It turned out that it was because he had a deep friendship with Shangguan Weiji. Du Wentian was blind and took liberties with the people around Shangguan Weiji, so he was beaten. Shanghai Wanner's face darkened. She asked Wu Chongxuan, "Prince Consort Wu, who was that just now?" At this time, Du Wentian had already covered his head and fled up the slope. Gaoing hit him on both legs, and he cried out in pain as he rolled down. Du Wentian's character was despicable, and he took liberties with women. This originally had nothing to do with Wu Chongxuan, but he was considered Wu Chongxuan's guest today. Moreover, Wu Chongxuan was staying in his residence, so he felt that his reputation had nothing to do with it. Wu Chongxuan awkwardly explained Du Wentian's identity. Shangguan Wanna said coolly, "Although it's easy to make friends with the emperor's son-in-law, it's better to keep a distance from such a despicable person. Wanner is injured and needs to go back to the residence to rest. I will not send you off." Originally, everyone had only come to be a witness. Originally, they felt that Liguera was making a big fuss over a small matter, so they disapproved of it. Now that Wanner had already taken measures to deal with it, and because they saw the lecher who took liberties with her servant girl, they were displeased. Why would they still stand here and look for trouble? Many of these people had friendly relations with Yang Fan. Zhang Changzong, with his status, did not see anyone off. However, Yang Fan had to see them off. He saw them off to the exit of the island before returning. Yang Fan did not return to his own residence, but went directly to Wanner's residence. This time he was using the pretense of inquiring about her injury, so naturally he could openly enter her residence. Yang Fan arrived at the rear residence. Just as he walked out of the bamboo forest, he saw Zhang Changzong bump into him. Yang Fan hurriedly supported him and said with a smile, "Sixth Lang, why are you always so flustered?" Zhang Changzong gasped for breath. "Oh no, oh no. Shangguan Daiji's torment seems to have affected the fetus. She's about to give birth." Chapter 1038. Gao Ying and Lan Yiqing were guarding the door of the backyard. 7 or 8 palace maids are going in and out of the room. Sometimes they remembered to take something. Sometimes they forgot to take something. They were like a group of headless flies bumping around everywhere. It was not their fault. They were a group of unmarried girls. How could they understand these things? Things happened too suddenly, so naturally they were messed up. Wanner and Gu Zhuting performed a special double act on the bowing field. The person on the horse was Gu Zhuting. She could only act 60 or 70% like Wanner, but it was enough to pass it off as real from a distance. There was a mezzanine in the oil cleaning car which used the same design as the props used in the illusion show. It could make people make a visual mistake. Wanner had hidden in the car in advance. Gu Zhuting pretended to be injured when she fell off the horse. After she was helped into the carriage, the two of them joined hands to perform an exquisite head swapping. Everyone saw that the body was Gu Zhuting's, while the head was Shangguan Wan'er's. It was a seamless and flawless disguise. It was difficult for Gu Zhuting to master such a difficult illusion in a short period of time, but her jiu-jitsu and escape skills made up for it. But the space in the compartment of the carriage was limited. Wanner already had a big belly, and she had spent too much time in there. She was already on the verge of giving birth, and this unavoidably affected the baby. The baby in her belly could not wait to come out. Now the person who performed the magic skill to help her deliver the baby was Gu Zhuting. Gu Zhuting did not even have time to change her clothes before she rushed into the car. At this moment, she was sweating profusely. Wanner had a natural birth, so it was not as dangerous as Xiaomang. However, when Gu Zhuting delivered Xiaomang last time, it had nothing to do with the Yang family. She did not care about the life or death of the baby. She just tried her best. This time was different. She was already a member of the Yang family. If something happened to the mother and the baby, it would be her fault. As the saying goes, care makes one confused. In addition, the weather in June was really hot. The sweat on Gu Zhuting's forehead was no less than that of Wanner, who was in labor. Yang Fan and Zhang Changzong sat under the grape trellis in the courtyard. There was wine, yogurt, and sour plum soup on the table, but Yang Fan didn't touch a single mouthful. In front of Zhang Changzong, Yang Fan could not show any special concern or worry, but his heart had already flown into the room. With every faint movement in the room, with every palace maid hurrying in and out, his heart would sometimes tighten and sometimes relax. Zhang Changzong crossed his legs and used a pair of silver tongs to pick up 2 pieces of ice fish and threw them into the glass. He gently swirled the dark red grape wine and said, "We have finally passed this hurdle. Now Shangguan Weiji is in labor. Once the child is born, there will be no more evidence for others to use against us." Yang Fan took a deep look at the door and couldn't help but say what was in his heart. "I hope she and her son are safe." Zhang Changzong waved his hand indifferently and said, "Although there is an old saying that women passing the hurdle of life and death when they give birth, it won't happen so coincidentally to Shangguan Weiji, right? So many women give birth and they are all safe and sound. All right, Erlang, tell me, isn't this heavens blessing us?" Zhang Changzong suddenly slapped the stone table, his face full of excitement. Yang Fan didn't understand what he was talking about and asked with some surprise, "What did heaven bless us with?" Zhang Changzong said with a smile, "Look, let them witness Shangguan Weiji's injury with their own eyes." If Shangguan Weiji can't make it through this hurdle and 2 lives are lost, we have to give an explanation to the outside, right? At that time, we can use this excuse. Ha ha! Falling and causing internal injuries. No one can find fault with this excuse, right? Although Warner was not related to him in any way, how could she say such cold words? Yang Fan's heart was burning with worry. Hearing her say such shameless words was like cursing his wife and son to die early. Anger rose in his heart, and he clenched his fists. He forced himself to restrain himself, and then turned to look at the door. Zhang Changzong felt that he had said something wrong, and seeing that Yang Fan didn't respond, he felt even more bored. He laughed dryly and changed the topic, saying, I really didn't see that the Li family has someone like Enlu. She is not simple. She actually thought of a way to trick me. This time I am safe and sound, but next she will be in trouble. Yang Fan said indifferently, because of Liu Long's words, the Wu family lost a son and a daughter-in-law, and the Li family lost a son and a daughter. Now both the Wu and Li families see you as an enemy. Lu Lang, please don't cause more trouble. Zhang Changzong laughed and raised his chin, saying proudly, the hatred is already formed. Even if I am willing to let it go, will they be willing to let it go? The officialdom is different from the business world. In the business world, harmony brings wealth. In the officialdom, one must either not fight or fight mercilessly. Only when the opponent is completely defeated will there be no future trouble. Zhang Changzong glanced at the side of Yang Fan's figure and lowered his voice. He said meaningfully, if you want to make friends in the officialdom, you must have a clear stand. An enemy is an enemy, a friend is a friend. If you are half-hearted and two-faced and want to have a foot in several boats, you will be the first to be killed in the end. The ice fish gradually melted in the wine. Zhang Changzong took a sip of wine and said slowly, if 2 people want a duel, but there is someone in the crowd who has an unclear stand, he may stab you in the back at any time. But you don't know who he will stab. The 2 parties who want to determine the winner must first get rid of him. Isn't this reasonable? Yang Fan didn't expect that Zhang Changzong, who never had any political wisdom, would say such words today. Moreover, he was beating around the bush in an attempt to win him over. After being in the officialdom for a long time, even if one was imperceptibly influenced, one would still learn some things. The reason why Zhang Changzong said such words today was probably because the 2 of them had teamed up against Princess Enlu today. Princess Enlu was shouldering 2 families on her own. Behind her was the Li family and the Wu family, so she felt that there was a good chance to pull him over to her side. Yang Fan thought, your metaphor is good, but do you think that you are the one in the duel? Not anyone can go on this arena. Those who can go on the arena can only have the surname Wu or Li. You are the one who needs to be the first to be cleared out by the duel. Yang Fan didn't have the slightest response. He was thinking about how to answer Zhang Changzong's words when the door suddenly opened. Xu Xiaomiao stood at the door panting. Her cheeks were as red as peaches, and her forehead was drenched in sweat. She stammered excitedly, born. Mother and daughter are safe. A loud and powerful cry of a baby accompanied saplings. Words drifted out of the room. Xu Xiaomiao's words were directed at Yang Fan. In this courtyard, besides Zhang Changzong, who didn't know that Yang Fan was the biological father of the child. Good. As Yang Fan said this, he almost jumped up and let out a cheer. But as soon as his toes touched the ground, he suddenly remembered that Zhang Changzong was beside him, so he quickly restrained himself. He wanted to immediately rush into the room to see his woman and child. But as soon as he leaned forward, before he shot out like an arrow, he immediately thought of Zhang Changzong. Any overly enthusiastic performance was inappropriate for him, and it didn't match his current position and identity. However, his excitement was already overflowing with words. His body first straightened, then leaned back, and it was already impossible for him to pretend to be calm. High Official Yang's quick-wittedness was on full display at this time. His body spun like a windmill, and he grabbed Zhang Changzong's hand. Yang Fan tightly held Zhang Changzong's hand and said excitedly, "That's great! The matter that the saint entrusted to us has finally been completed. Ha ha ha, Lu Lang, do you feel relieved now?" Zhang Changzong's mouth was full of tears, and he said with difficulty, Let go. It hurts. It hurts. Let go. It hurts so much." When the two of them walked out of Wan Er's residence, Yang Fan was in high spirits, and he said to Zhang Changzong in high spirits, "Today I went to Yu Palace's banquet, but because of the fire I didn't eat and drink well. Then I came to the island, and I'm covered in sweat. I'm going back to take a bath, and I'll invite Lu Lang to drink tonight." Zhang Changzong swung his fiery red palm and said with a grimace, "Good. I also want to go back and take a bath. See you tonight." The two of them lived in Lu Xuantian's residence, one in the East Stride courtyard, and the other in the West Stride courtyard. Outside of Yang Fan's courtyard was the outer wall of Wan Er's courtyard, which was about 100 feet away. Yang Fan rushed back to his own courtyard, and without a moment's pause, he jumped over the wall. A moment later, he appeared in Wan Er's bedroom, panting. Although the bedroom was still messy, it had been cleaned up. Gu Zhuting stood in the room, looking at Yang Fan, and said with a smile, "Sister Wan Er and her daughter are safe." Yang Fan opened his mouth to say something, but for a moment he couldn't say anything. He just opened his arms and tightly hugged Gu Zhuting, so hard that she almost couldn't breathe. Only then did he let go of her and looked towards the bed. He saw Wan Er lying on the bed, and her face was a little haggard, but she was smiling sweetly, and her smile was incomparably serene and contented. Yang Fan walked over, sat down by the bed, and held her hand. Her hand was a little cold and unusually soft. Gu Zhuting smiled and walked out, and on the way, gently closed the barrier door. Yang Fan stretched out his hand and tenderly wiped Wan Er's forehead. Someone had already wiped her face, but there was still a thin layer of sweat seeping out. Yang Fan completely wrapped her hands in his palms, and with a slight turn of his gaze, he saw the child in the swaddling clothes. A flower lattice bundle wrapped around a small person. Only half the size of a palm could be seen. The little one's eyes were closed, and she was sleeping very sweetly. She was on the bed, right inside Wan Er's body. The two of them, one big and one small, intertwined into two warm currents, rippling in Yang Fan's heart. Yang Fan's doting gaze lingered on the child's face for a long time, and then turned to Wan Er. In a low voice, he said, "It's a daughter, our daughter. When she grows up, she will be as beautiful as you." Wan Er softly said, "Now it's as you wish." Yang Fan chuckled before he quickly shut his mouth, fearing that he would wake his daughter up. He lowered his voice and softly asked, "How are you?" Wan Er gently rubbed her stomach and quietly said, "My stomach is empty, but my heart is full." The two of them looked at each other and suddenly laughed at the same time. Smiling, they looked at the crystallization of their love. After a long time, Wan Er withdrew her soft gaze from her daughter's face and said to Yang Fan, "Lang Jun, let's give our daughter a name." Yang Fan gently stroked her cheek and then slowly moved to the space between her eyebrows and stroked the scar that had been drawn into a plum blossom and quietly said, "Dyer, let's call her." Yang Dyer